This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've been debating whether to share this for years. Even now, my hands are shaking as I type this out. I'm not normally the type to believe in supernatural stuff, but what happened to me 5 years ago in Tijuana has left me questioning everything I thought I knew. It was supposed to be a simple trip. My boyfriend Carlos, our 3-year-old daughter Sofia, and I were returning to San Diego after visiting Carlos's family in Ensenada. We planned to cross the border before nightfall, but the weather had other plans. What started as light drizzle turned into a full-blown storm, the kind where you can barely see 10 feet ahead of you on the highway. By the time we reached Tijuana, it was already getting dark and the rain was coming down in sheets. Carlos suggested we find a hotel for the night rather than risk driving through the flooded streets. I agreed, thinking it would be a minor inconvenience. I had no idea what was waiting for us. Finding a vacant room was a nightmare. We stopped at 5 different hotels, all completely booked because of the storm. I was getting desperate. Sofia was cranky from being in the car so long, and Carlos was getting frustrated. Finally, at around 9 in the evening, we found a place on the outskirts of town, one of those older hotels that looked like it had seen better days. The lobby was dimly lit with yellowish lights that made everything look dingy. The receptionist, an older woman with tired eyes, told us they had exactly 1 room left. At that point, I would have taken anything with a bed, so we paid without hesitation. The room was on the 3rd floor, at the very end of a long hallway. As soon as we stepped inside, I felt something was off. The air was thick and stifling. Carlos went to adjust the air conditioning, but no matter what setting he chose, it kept getting hotter. The thermostat read 86 degrees and climbing, despite being set to 68. After 20 minutes of trying to fix it ourselves, Carlos called the front desk. They sent up a maintenance guy who fiddled with it for a while before admitting it was broken. When we asked to change rooms, he looked uncomfortable and said he needed to check with reception. He left, and we waited. 30 minutes passed. No one came back. Carlos called again, and after some arguing and threatening to leave without paying, they finally agreed to move us to another room. The new room was on the 1st floor, tucked away near a maintenance closet and an exit door. I remember thinking it was weird that they put us so far from other guests, but I was too tired to care. The room smelled stale, like it hadn't been used in months. The sheets were cold and stiff, and there was a faint musty odor coming from the bathroom. Still, it was cooler than the previous room, and all I wanted was to put Sofia to bed and get some sleep. We settled in around 11. Sofia fell asleep quickly in the rollaway bed they'd provided, and Carlos dozed off soon after. I stayed up a bit longer, scrolling through my phone, when I first heard it. A scraping sound, like furniture being dragged across the floor, coming from behind the headboard. I froze, listening intently. The sound stopped, then started again, followed by soft thumps against the wall. I nudged Carlos, but he just mumbled something and rolled over. I convinced myself it was just other hotel guests, even though something about the sounds felt wrong. I needed to use the bathroom but hesitated to get up. When I finally did, I hurried across the room, feeling like someone was watching me. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and told myself to get a grip. That's when I heard another thump. This time, it seemed to come from behind the mirror. I quickly finished and practically ran back to bed. Sofia was awake when I returned, fussing and clearly unable to settle. I picked her up and placed her next to Carlos, figuring she'd sleep better with him. This meant I had a bed to myself, which normally would have been a luxury. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember is waking up to more dragging sounds, louder this time, and something else, a soft, muffled weeping. It was faint at first, like someone trying to cry quietly, but it gradually grew into unmistakable sobbing. The sound was coming from behind the wall, right where the maintenance closet should be. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I sat up in the darkness, straining to see anything in the dimly lit room. The only light came from the bathroom where we'd left the door cracked open for Sophia. That's when I saw it, a roundish shadow at the foot of my bed, just a quick glimpse, like someone peeking over the edge and then ducking down. I froze, unable to call out to Carlos, who was sleeping soundly with Sophia across the room. I stared at the spot, telling myself I was imagining things. Then I saw it again, this time from the bathroom door. The shadow slowly peeked around the edge, then quickly disappeared when I turned toward it. I couldn't make out a face, just a dark, formless shape. My entire body went cold. I wanted to scream but couldn't find my voice. I watched in horror as the shadow emerged again, this time climbing onto the frame of my bed. It moved slowly, deliberately, crawling toward me along the edge. Suddenly, I was jolted awake, gasping for air. Had I been dreaming? I was still sitting up in bed, exactly where I'd been before. The room was quiet, no dragging, no sobbing, just the sound of Carlos and Sophia breathing steadily across the room. Sleep paralysis, I thought. It had to be. I'd experienced it once before in college and knew how terrifyingly real it could seem. Relief washed over me as I lay back down, pulling the sheets up to my chin. That's when it happened. As I tried to get comfortable, I felt resistance from the sheets, as if someone was holding them down at the foot of the bed. I tugged harder, and they came loose. And then, right next to my ear, so close I could feel the breath, came the most horrifying sound I've ever heard. A loud, screeching sob that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. I screamed and launched myself out of bed, falling hard onto the floor. Carlos jolted awake, calling my name. I scrambled back under the covers, shaking violently, unable to form words. All I could do was point at the space beside me on the bed. Carlos turned on the lights, checked the room, looked under the bed, in the bathroom, even opened the door to check the hallway. Nothing. He tried to comfort me, saying I'd had a nightmare, but I knew what I'd heard. That sound wasn't from any dream. It was real, and it was right next to me. I refused to sleep in that bed again. I spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair, watching Sophia and Carlos sleep, jumping at every little sound. When morning finally came, I'd never been so grateful to see sunlight. Before checking out, I walked down the hallway to see what was behind our room. There was nothing, just the maintenance closet and the exit door, exactly as I'd thought. The wall where I'd heard the sobbing was shared with the closet, not another room. In the car, I asked Carlos if he'd heard anything during the night before I screamed. "I heard you yell," he said. "But before that?" "No, I was out cold. Didn't even dream." He paused, then added, "Actually, I think I did hear something at one point, like someone crying. But I was so tired, I figured it was just Sophia, or maybe someone outside. It's been 5 years, and I still haven't been able to explain what happened that night. I've researched the hotel online, but never found any stories about it being haunted. I've talked to therapists who suggest it was a combination of stress, an unfamiliar environment, and possibly sleep paralysis. But none of that explains the sobbing, or the breath I felt on my ear, or the shadow I saw climbing onto my bed. I have to go back to Tijuana next month for a friend's wedding. I've already told Carlos we're staying at a major chain hotel, well away from where we stayed last time, and I'm bringing earplugs. Not that I think they'll help if whatever was in that room decides to find me again. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear that soft weeping in the darkness, and in those moments, I know deep down that whatever was in that hotel room was real, and I pray I never encounter it again. Story 2: I've been hesitating to share this for months now, but I need to get it off my chest. I still don't have an explanation for what happened, and it's making me uneasy to be alone in my house. This happened about 6 months ago. I live with my husband James in his family home, a fairly isolated place on the outskirts of Springfield. It's one of those older houses with character, creaky floorboards, doors that make distinctive sounds. You know the type. We live with 3 German shepherds, Max, my service dog, Luna, and Diesel. Max has been my service dog for 4 years now, and I can read his behavior like a book. He's the most level-headed, brave dog I've ever known. Nothing rattles him. Not thunderstorms, not strangers, not even when the smoke alarm went off that time I burned dinner. That particular day, James had left early in the morning to meet up with some friends for their monthly fishing trip. His dad, Robert, who sometimes drops by unannounced, was supposed to be visiting his sister a few hours away. I was enjoying a quiet day alone with the dogs, catching up on some reading. I should mention that the night before, James and I had gotten into a huge argument. The kind where you say things you don't mean and go to bed angry. It was about something stupid, as most big fights are. He wanted to sell the house and move closer to town, while I was attached to the place despite its isolation. Words were said, doors were slammed, and we both went to bed feeling awful. Anyway, it was around midday, and I was curled up on the couch with Max lying at my feet, completely knocked out in that deep sleep dogs get into. Luna and Diesel were in the kitchen. They usually hang out there hoping for scraps or because the floor is cooler. That's when I heard it, the front doors opening. Our house has this old wooden main door that makes this distinct creaking noise when it opens, followed by a metal screen door that always slams shut with this vibrating noise. It's a sound you get used to when you live somewhere, you know? I immediately recognized it as our front door, and I figured it must be my father-in-law Robert dropping by. What happened next is what still gives me chills. Max, who had been in a deep sleep, literally shot awake. His eyes were bulging, and he looked terrified. I've never seen him look like that before, ever. This is a dog who once chased off a bear that wandered onto our property, and he was trembling. I called out, "Robert, is that you?" No answer. Then I heard footsteps moving through the front hallway. They were heavy, like a man's footsteps, moving deliberately through the house. The weird thing was, they sounded exactly like my father-in-law's distinctive walk. He has this slight limp from an old knee injury, so his footsteps have a particular rhythm to them. Max was still frozen, staring at the hallway entrance with his ears pinned back. I was confused by his reaction, but not yet scared. I figured maybe Robert had brought someone with him who Max didn't know, or maybe he was carrying something that made him look different to Max. The footsteps continued through the living room and toward the back of the house, heading to the kitchen and the back door. This is when it got really weird. Max suddenly darted away from me and squeezed through his doggy door to the backyard, something he never does without being told it's okay. I heard Luna and Diesel scrambling from the kitchen to follow him. I got up and went to the kitchen window, expecting to see Robert in the backyard, maybe coming in the back way after checking something outside. All three dogs were at the back door, looking confused and alert, but there was nobody there for them to greet. The footsteps continued inside the house. I could hear them moving around, from the kitchen back to the living room, then down the hall to our bedroom, then back again. They continued for about 15 minutes, just moving around the house as if someone was looking for something. Then suddenly, they stopped. There was no sound of a door opening or closing, just silence. By this point, I was a little freaked out, but still convinced myself it had to be Robert. Maybe he'd gone into the basement or the attic where I couldn't hear him moving around. I called out several times, but nobody answered. I let the dogs back in, and Max was acting so strange. He wouldn't leave my side, but he also wouldn't relax. He kept looking around the house, especially at the hallway, and would occasionally let out these low whines. Luna and Diesel were on edge too, but not as badly as Max. About an hour later, James came home early. Apparently, the fishing trip got cancelled because of bad weather. I told him what happened and how strangely Max was acting. That's when we noticed something really disturbing. There was a puddle of urine where Max had been lying when the footsteps started. Max hasn't had an accident in the house since he was a 10-week-old puppy. He was so scared he'd wet himself. James immediately called his dad, and sure enough, Robert was still at his sister's place, hours away. He hadn't been anywhere near our house. We searched the entire house together. Every closet, under every bed, the attic, the basement, everything. Nothing was disturbed or missing. All the windows were locked from the inside. The only doors in and out of the house are the front and back doors, both of which have distinct sounds when opened and closed, and I hadn't heard either of them close after the initial opening sound. I was getting really scared at this point. I've always been a pretty logical person. I work in healthcare, I have a scientific mind, but I couldn't come up with any rational explanation for what happened. James and his dad, however, immediately had a theory. James's mother died in this house 16 years ago. She had a long battle with cancer and passed away in what is now our bedroom. According to James and Robert, she occasionally makes her presence known, especially during times of family conflict. They think she was responding to the fight James and I had the night before. Here's the thing, I do believe in the supernatural. I've had unexplainable experiences before, but this was different. This felt so physical, so real. Those footsteps weren't the creaking of an old house settling or pipes expanding. They were deliberate movements that mimicked a specific person's gait. What really gets me is Max's reaction. Dogs have instincts we don't understand. They can sense things we can't, and whatever Max sensed that day terrified him to his core. This is a dog who's been through specialized training, who's faced all kinds of situations without flinching. What could make him react like that? For weeks afterward, Max was jumpy in the house. He'd suddenly stare at empty corners or doorways. He'd refuse to enter certain rooms alone. It's only in the last month or so that he's started to act normal again. James has been understanding but also kind of matter-of-fact about it. In his mind, it was just his mom checking in. Robert feels the same way. They've both experienced similar things in the house over the years and have made peace with it. But I can't shake it off so easily. I find myself listening for those footsteps whenever I'm alone in the house. I hate being there by myself now. Sometimes I swear I can feel someone watching me, especially in the hallway or our bedroom. The logical part of my brain keeps trying to find explanations. Could it have been an intruder who somehow got in and out without being seen? But nothing was taken, and how would they have mimicked Robert's walk so perfectly? Could it have been some kind of auditory hallucination? But then why did all three dogs react to it? I don't know what to think anymore. All I know is that something walked through our house that day, something that terrified my fearless dog, something that sounded exactly like my father-in-law but couldn't have been him, something that moved with purpose but left no trace. The house feels different to me now. I'm hyper-aware of every creak and groan. I find myself talking out loud sometimes, just in case James's mother is listening. I say things like, "I love your son very much and I'm taking good care of your home." I feel silly doing it, but also compelled. James and I haven't had another big fight since that day. Maybe that's one good thing that came out of it. We're both more careful with our words now, more gentle with each other. Sometimes I wonder if that was the point. If whatever or whoever walked through our house that day was trying to remind us of what's important. But then I remember the look in Max's eyes, that pure, primal fear, and I'm not so sure it was a benevolent visit. What could make a dog like Max, who's faced down actual threats without blinking, react with such terror to something he couldn't even see? I still don't have answers. I'm not sure I ever will. All I know is that I'm never truly comfortable being alone in this house anymore, and I always keep Max close by my side, because if whatever it was comes back, I want to be prepared, though for what, I couldn't tell you. I just know that the sound of our front doors opening now fills me with dread rather than welcome, and I find myself holding my breath, waiting to hear those familiar yet impossible footsteps making their way through our home once again. Story: I've been working from home for nearly a year now, but only in the last few months did I start using our basement as my office space. It made sense. I needed somewhere quiet away from the general noise of the house, and we had finished half the basement a couple years back. My wife uses the other side for storage and laundry, but I have a decent-sized area with a desk, good lighting, and reliable internet. It's actually pretty comfortable despite being underground. The first incident happened about 3 months ago. It was a Friday morning. I remember specifically because I had a light schedule that day and was catching up on some reports. It was somewhere between 10 and noon. I hadn't been paying much attention to the clock. I heard it clearly, 3 or 4 soft taps. It wasn't loud, but distinct enough that I stopped typing mid-sentence. It sounded like someone gently knocking on a door or wall to get attention without being intrusive. You know that polite knock people do when they're not sure if you're busy? Exactly like that. I sat there for a moment trying to figure out where it came from. The wall, the ceiling. Maybe it was coming from outside through the small basement window. I got up and checked the window, but there was nothing there. No trees close enough to tap branches against it. No sign of anything that could have made the noise. I chalked it up to the house settling. Our place is about 40 years old, and it makes all sorts of weird noises. I went back to work and honestly forgot about it until the following Friday. Same time frame, between 10 and noon. I was on my second cup of coffee, deep into a spreadsheet when I heard it again. But this time, it was undeniably 4 distinct knocks. Not random creaks or pops. These sounded intentional. They came from the same general area as before, about 8 feet from where I was sitting, near the wall that separates my office space from the unfinished part of the basement. It freaked me out enough that I got up and did a full inspection. I checked the furnace, the water heater, the pipes running along the ceiling. Nothing seemed out of place or like it could be making that sound. I even went upstairs to make sure nobody had come home, but the house was empty. My wife was at work, and we don't have kids. Just our cat, who was sunning himself in the living room window. After the second incident, things went quiet for a while. I almost mentioned it to my wife a couple of times, but decided against it. What was I going to say? Hey, I think someone's knocking on the wall in our basement. It sounded ridiculous, even in my head. About a month or 2 passed without incident. I had pretty much forgotten about the whole thing. Then another Friday rolled around. I remember checking my calendar that morning and seeing it was pretty light, just one meeting at 11:30. I went down to the basement around 9, made myself comfortable, and started working. At first, everything was normal. I was responding to emails, had some music playing softly in the background. Then, right around 10:30, the tapping started again. This time it was rhythmic, tap, 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 tap. A pattern. It wasn't random noise from the house settling. It wasn't the pipes. It was as if someone was trying to get my attention. I sat completely still, barely breathing, and listened. It happened again. The exact same pattern. Tap, 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 coming from the same spot as before. "Hello?" I called out, feeling immediately stupid for doing so. Of course, no one answered. I got up and pressed my ear against the wall where the sound seemed to be coming from. Nothing. I knocked back 3 times. Silence. After standing there for what felt like forever but was probably only a minute or 2, I returned to my desk, feeling uneasy but telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. The most recent incident happened just last week, and it's what finally pushed me to write this all down. I was on a work call at 11:15. Yes, on a Friday morning. My co-worker James and I were discussing a project when I heard it. Not tapping this time. Music. There's an old music box that belongs to my wife somewhere in the storage area of the basement. I'd seen it once or twice when looking for Christmas decorations, but hadn't thought about it in years. Suddenly, I heard it playing. 6 to 8 slow, choppy notes, like someone was turning the crank hesitantly, trying to figure out how it worked. James must have noticed my expression change because he asked if I was okay. I tried to play it off with a nervous laugh. "I think my house might be haunted," I joked. "Just heard a music box playing in my basement and there's nobody else home." He laughed too, but I could tell he thought I was just making an excuse for being distracted. We finished our call and I immediately went to investigate the storage area. The music box was exactly where it had always been, on a shelf behind some photo albums. I picked it up carefully. It was covered in a thin layer of dust, clearly untouched for a long time. I wound it up and listened. The melody was the same one I'd heard moments earlier, but when I played it, the notes flowed smoothly, rather than in the halting, uncertain way I'd heard before. That's when it hit me. All of these incidents had happened on Friday mornings, always between 10 and noon, never any other day of the week, never in the afternoon or evening, always Friday morning. I sat down on an old storage container, still holding the music box, and tried to make sense of it all. That's when I remembered something from years ago, shortly after we'd moved in. My wife had burned white sage in the basement because she said it felt off down there. I had rolled my eyes at the time, thinking it was just one of her new age phases. But our cat, the same one who now couldn't care less about the basement, used to stand at the top of the basement stairs and scream his head off whenever either of us went down there. Not meow, not yowl, scream. It was disturbing enough that we'd mentioned it to friends a few times, laughing uncomfortably about our possessed cat. After my wife did her sage burning ritual, the cat stopped the screaming behavior completely. I hadn't connected these events until that moment, sitting in the storage room with the music box in my hands. I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits or whatever. At least, I didn't used to. But sitting there, alone in my basement, after hearing that music box play itself, I couldn't deny that something strange was happening. I put the music box back exactly as I'd found it and returned to my desk. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus on work. I kept listening for more sounds, but the basement remained silent. That evening, after my wife went to bed, I went back down to the basement. I felt ridiculous doing it, but I needed to try something. I stood in the middle of my office area and spoke out loud. If someone's here, I just want you to know that you've passed on. You're a ghost now. Whatever is keeping you here, it's okay to let go. It's okay to move on. My voice echoed slightly in the quiet basement. I felt a chill, though the temperature hadn't changed. I waited for a response, a knock, a tap, anything. But there was nothing. I don't mind sharing the space, I continued, feeling increasingly foolish, but pressing on anyway. But the tapping and the music box, it's startling. If you need to communicate, maybe we can find a less scary way. Still nothing. After a few more minutes of standing there feeling like an idiot, I went back upstairs. That was 5 days ago. Tomorrow is Friday again. I'm writing this all down now because I want a record of what's been happening, just in case. Part of me hopes nothing will happen tomorrow. Part of me is curious to see if whatever or whoever is down there will try to communicate again. I haven't told my wife about any of this yet. She'd either think I was losing my mind or get freaked out and want to move. Neither seems like a great option right now, so here I am, waiting for Friday morning to come around. Will there be tapping? Will the music box play again? Or will my strange basement visitor finally reveal itself? I've set up a voice recorder on my phone just in case. If anything happens, I'll try to capture it. All I know is that something or someone seems to be reaching out, always at the same time, always on Fridays. And I can't help but wonder, what's so special about Friday mornings between 10 and noon? What happened during that time? Who is trying to get my attention? I guess I'll find out tomorrow. Story 4. I still remember the first time I met Thomas Warren. It was early January 1984, and I was handling dispatch that day at the Huntington PD. The way he walked into the station, confident, shoulders back, with that perfect smile, you'd think he'd stepped right out of a police recruitment poster. I've been with the department for 11 years, so I've seen plenty of rookies come through those doors, but Warren was different. "I'm here to meet with Chief Donovan," he said, his voice carrying that perfect mix of respect and self-assurance. "I'm the transfer from Springfield." As the administrative assistant to Chief Donovan, I handled all the personnel files, so I knew we were expecting a new officer with impressive credentials. Warren's application had listed 5 years with Springfield PD and specialized training in surveillance and security. The department was desperate for experienced officers after budget cuts forced 3 retirements without replacements. When I look back now, I should have noticed the red flags, the way he'd changed the subject whenever specific questions about Springfield came up, how his stories about past cases always seemed vague on details but heavy on heroics. But we were all so relieved to have another body on patrol, especially one who looked the part so well. Warren was tall, 6'2" at least, with neatly trimmed dark hair and the kind of physique that suggested regular gym visits. He wore his uniform like he was born in it, always pressed, shoes always shined. He had this way of looking you directly in the eyes when you spoke that made you feel like the most important person in the room. Within weeks, he'd volunteered for the night shift patrol in Ridgewood, our town's wealthiest neighborhood. We'd been dealing with a string of break-ins there for months. Nothing violent, but expensive items disappearing while residents slept. The chief was getting pressure from the mayor, whose golf buddies all lived in those big houses. "I'll take Ridgewood," Warren had said during a staff meeting. "I've handled similar cases before. I think I can make a difference there." And he did. That's the crazy part. The break-in stopped completely after Warren started patrolling. Not a single report came in. The residents started inviting him for dinner, bringing him homemade cookies during his shifts. He became their personal guardian, and they loved him for it. I remember seeing him talking to Mrs. Hartwell, one of the neighborhood association leaders, in the station lobby one afternoon. They were discussing home security, and Warren was showing her a brochure. "With what's been happening, I just want to make sure we're doing everything possible to stay safe," she said, looking worried. "Absolutely," Warren replied, his voice reassuring. "This company, Safeguard Solutions, has the best systems I've seen in my career, military-grade monitoring. I've recommended them to several residents already." I didn't think much of it at the time. It seemed like he was just being helpful. The chief was thrilled. Warren was solving our biggest headache and making the department look good. When the local paper ran a story about him titled "Ridgewood's Guardian Angel," Chief Donovan had it framed. About 3 months after Warren joined us, I was filing paperwork when he brought in a suspect, Michael Carlisle, a 26-year-old who worked at the hardware store downtown. I'd known Michael since he was a kid. Quiet type, never caused trouble. Warren had him in cuffs, charging him with burglary. "Caught him coming out of the Peterson place with a bag of jewelry," Warren explained as he processed the arrest. "He ran when he saw my patrol car, but I managed to catch him before he got far." Michael kept saying he was innocent, that he'd just been walking home from a friend's house and hadn't been anywhere near the Peterson residence. But it was his word against an officer's, and Warren's reputation in town was gold by then. Michael was held for trial, and most people assumed the case was closed. Then Detective Sandra Reeves came back from medical leave. Sandra had been with the department for 15 years and had a reputation for being meticulous. She'd been out for 2 months recovering from surgery, and Warren had joined while she was gone. I was at my desk when I overheard Sandra questioning Warren's arrest report on the Carlisle case. "This doesn't make sense," she said, frowning at the paperwork. "You've got the Peterson house listed at 220 Oak Lane, but that address doesn't exist. The Petersons live at 220 Oak Street." Warren brushed it off as a simple typo, but I noticed Sandra didn't look convinced. The next day, she came to my desk asking for Warren's personnel file. "Just trying to get to know our new guy better," she said casually, but there was something in her eyes that made me think there was more to it. 3 days later, everything exploded. I arrived at work to find the station in chaos. Chief Donovan was red-faced, shouting into his phone. 2 FBI agents were setting up in our conference room, and Sandra was standing by my desk, waiting. "You need to see this," she said, handing me a folder. Inside was a faxed report from Springfield PD stating they had no record of a Thomas Warren ever serving with their department. There were similar statements from every other agency he'd listed on his application. "I got suspicious when I saw inconsistencies in his reports," Sandra explained. "Police work is all about details, and his were all wrong. The addresses, the procedures, even the codes he used on his paperwork. It was like someone who'd learned police work from TV." The truth came out over the next 72 hours, and it was more disturbing than any of us could have imagined. Thomas Warren was actually David Russell Pierce, a 34-year-old con man with a record of fraud in 3 states. He'd never been a police officer anywhere. The FBI explained that Pierce had worked for a security company in Missouri before being fired for suspected theft. He'd dated a police dispatcher in Indianapolis for 6 months, long enough to gain access to procedure manuals, forms, and the inner workings of a police department. When they searched his apartment, they found a storage room filled with items reported stolen from Ridgewood homes: jewelry, electronics, rare coins. He'd been the burglar all along. The break-ins didn't stop when he started patrolling. They just stopped being reported because he was the one doing them. Pierce had been using his position as a trusted officer to conduct surveillance on the homes. He knew their layouts, their routines when they'd be empty, and the security systems he'd been recommending. Safeguard Solutions was paying him a commission for every installation. Even worse, their systems had a backdoor that notified Pierce when residents activated or deactivated their alarms. I felt physically sick when I learned what he'd done to Michael Carlisle. Pierce had deliberately framed him, picking someone with no connection to Ridgewood who'd be walking alone at night. He needed to provide a neat conclusion to the break-in cases before anyone got suspicious about his own activities. We arrested Pierce during a shift change. I'll never forget the look on his face when he walked into the station and saw the FBI agents waiting. There wasn't fear or shame, just a flash of annoyance, like we'd interrupted his plans rather than exposed his crimes. "You should have checked my references," he said to Chief Donovan as they put him in handcuffs. He actually smiled. "It's not my fault you people are so desperate for heroes that you'll believe anything." The psychological evaluation done after his arrest diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder. The court psychologist's report included a quote from Pierce that still haunts me. "They gave me the keys to the kingdom. They wanted so badly to believe in the uniform that they never looked at the man wearing it." The aftermath was brutal for our department. Chief Donovan took early retirement. Michael Carlisle sued the city and won a substantial settlement. Every case Warren, Pierce, had touched had to be reviewed. The media had a field day, of course. "Con man badges, his way into police force" was the headline for weeks. I testified at his trial, having to admit that I was the one who initially processed his application. The defense tried to blame the department's lax standards, but the evidence against Pierce was overwhelming. He received 32 years without parole. What keeps me up at night isn't just the fact that we were fooled, it's how easily it happened. Pierce knew exactly what we wanted to see: a competent, confident officer who would solve our problems, and we saw what we wanted to believe. We've changed our hiring procedures completely. Every reference is verified by multiple people. Background checks go back 10 years. Psychological evaluations are more extensive. The FBI now uses Pierce's case as a training example for police academies nationwide. Sometimes I drive through Ridgewood and see those houses with their Safeguard Solutions signs still in the front yards. Some residents never replaced them, either not knowing or not wanting to remember that their guardian angel was the very danger they feared. I still work at the department. Sometimes new officers ask me about the Pierce incident. I tell them the facts, but I can never fully explain the feeling of betrayal, how someone wormed their way into our trust so completely, how we handed him a badge, a gun, and the authority to enter people's homes because he looked the part and told us what we wanted to hear. When I process new applications now, I look beyond the qualifications and recommendations. I look for the person behind the paperwork, remembering that the uniform doesn't make the officer, and sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones we invite through our doors. Pierce will be eligible for parole in 8 more years. I've already decided I'll be at every hearing to make sure he serves every day of those 32 years. Not just for what he did to our department or to the people of Ridgewood, but for showing us how vulnerable we were, and might still be, to someone who understands that sometimes the best disguise is simply being what others desperately want you to be. Story 5. I still get chills thinking about that house. It's been 15 years since we left for good, but some nights I still wake up feeling something grabbing at my ankle under the bed. I check, nothing there, but the memory of that bruise keeps me awake until dawn. When my grandmother Emily first offered us her house on Glenwood Avenue in Owasso, it seemed like a blessing. My husband Butch had just lost his job at the auto plant, and with 3 kids between us, my daughter Charlotte and his 2, Sandy and James, we were desperate. Grandma Emily was moving to a retirement community and wanted to keep the house in the family. She'd lived there for almost 30 years. "It's a good house, Pat," she told me as she handed over the keys. "Just sometimes it feels like there's someone else living here too." I laughed it off. Grandma was getting older, and I figured she was just experiencing the normal creaks and groans of an aging house. What she actually said was more specific. She'd wake up feeling like a cat was walking across her bed, though she never had pets. She'd feel tugging at her blankets at night, and most disturbing, she'd hear water running in the bathroom all night long. But when she'd check, the faucets were bone dry. The first week in the house was fine. We were too busy unpacking and settling in to notice anything unusual. Charlotte was only 7 then, Sandy was 9, and James was 12. The kids were excited about having more space than our cramped apartment. It was Charlotte who first mentioned something strange. She came home from school one day, about 3 weeks after we'd moved in, upset because some neighborhood kids had been teasing her. "They said a witch used to live in our house," she said, her eyes wide. "They said she did spells in the basement." I reassured her it was just kids being mean to the new girl. But that night, I found myself standing at the top of the basement stairs, staring down into the darkness, feeling oddly reluctant to go down. I shook it off. It was just an unfinished basement with concrete floors and exposed pipes. Nothing sinister. The real problems started about a month in. Charlotte and Sandy shared the largest bedroom upstairs. One morning, they both came down to breakfast looking exhausted. "We saw red eyes in the closet," Sandy whispered. "They were watching us." Charlotte nodded vigorously. They glowed, like a cat's eyes, but bigger and redder. I checked their closet thoroughly that day. Nothing but clothes and shoes. I even moved everything out to show them there was no place for anyone or anything to hide. "See? No monsters," I said, trying to sound confident. That night, Charlotte crawled into bed with Sandy. From then on, they refused to sleep apart, despite having 2 perfectly good twin beds in the room. A few days later, I noticed something strange on the wall near the staircase. The drywall was crumbling slightly in one spot, and what looked like long black hairs were poking through. I touched one. It felt like real human hair. I pulled it, and it kept coming, maybe 6 inches long before it stopped. I yanked it out completely and threw it away, telling myself it must have somehow gotten embedded when the wall was built. But the next day, more hairs were pushing through the same spot. Butch said it was probably just some old horsehair plaster. He patched the wall that weekend. The hairs didn't come back, at least not there. One night in our 4th month in the house, Butch was working late. The kids were asleep, and I was in bed reading, waiting for him to come home. It was around 11:30. The house was absolutely silent except for the occasional car passing on Glenwood. I felt something brush against my ankle under the covers. At first, I thought it was just the sheet moving as I shifted position. Then it happened again, more deliberate this time, like fingers wrapping around my ankle. Before I could react, whatever had hold of my ankle yanked hard, so hard that my entire body jerked toward the foot of the bed. I screamed and kicked, scrambling up against the headboard. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I turned on every light in the room. Nothing was there. Nothing under the bed, nothing in the closet. But my ankle was already developing a bruise. 5 distinct marks where something had grabbed me. When Butch got home around midnight, he found me sitting in the brightly lit kitchen, shaking. He checked the house top to bottom but found nothing. He tried to convince me I must have caught my foot in the sheets and panicked half asleep. But those bruises, they were there for over a week. Charlotte's behavior changed dramatically during our time in that house. She'd been such a happy, outgoing kid before, but now she was withdrawn and nervous. She started having regular nightmares and would wake up screaming about the black people in her room. To be clear, she wasn't talking about African Americans. She was describing tall, shadowy figures that she said stood in the corners of rooms watching her. She'd been seeing them since she was 2, according to what my mother later told me. But in this house, the sightings became almost daily. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard Charlotte screaming upstairs. I ran up to find her backed into a corner of the hallway, pointing at nothing. "It's right there," she shrieked. "Can't you see it? It's right there." I couldn't see anything, but the air in that spot felt suddenly cold. Charlotte refused to walk past that section of hallway for 3 days. We lived in the house for 8 months before things got so bad we had to leave. We stayed with my sister for a while, telling ourselves and everyone else it was because of plumbing problems. In reality, none of us could sleep there anymore. The kids were having constant nightmares. Butch and I argued constantly, both of us on edge from lack of sleep and the constant feeling of being watched. When Butch found a new job in Lansing, we jumped at the chance to move, even though it meant a longer commute for me. We rented out the Glenwood house, figuring we'd sell it eventually. The first tenants lasted 3 months, the second, only 6 weeks. They all had different complaints: strange noises, items moving, feelings of being watched. One renter, a single mom with 2 teenagers, called me in the middle of the night to say she was leaving immediately because something had dragged her son halfway out of his bed while he was sleeping. Financial problems forced us back to the house 5 years later. Butch's new job hadn't worked out, and we couldn't afford 2 housing payments anymore. The kids were older now. Charlotte was 12, Sandy 14, and James 17. We hoped that maybe whatever had been in the house had moved on, or that we'd just been stressed and imagining things before. We were wrong. The very first night back, James, who had been too old and cool to admit to being scared during our first stay, came into our bedroom at 3 in the morning. "There's something in my closet," he said, looking embarrassed but genuinely frightened. I saw red eyes watching me, the same red eyes Charlotte and Sandy had seen years before. The next morning, Charlotte refused to go into the bathroom alone. "The black figure is standing in the shower," she insisted. I went in with her and saw nothing, but she screamed when I pulled back the shower curtain, even though the stall was empty. That night, I was alone again. Butch was at a job interview in Detroit and staying overnight. The kids were all sleeping in James's room. Safety in numbers, they said. I was trying to sleep, but kept hearing what sounded like footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate steps coming up toward the bedrooms. I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses make noises. But then I heard what sounded like breathing outside my bedroom door. Heavy, ragged breathing. I lay frozen, unable to move or call out. The doorknob turned slowly. The door began to open, then I felt it again. That same grip on my ankle. This time it wasn't just a grab and pull. Whatever had hold of me shook my leg violently, like a dog with a toy. The pain was immediate and intense. I screamed and somehow found the strength to jump out of bed. I ran to James's room and woke all 3 kids. We spent the rest of the night in the car in the driveway, doors locked, waiting for dawn. When Butch got home the next day, I showed him the new bruises, worse than before, dark purple marks in the shape of fingers. This time, he believed me. We left that day, packed what we could fit in our 2 cars and just drove away. We stayed in a motel until we found a small apartment we could afford. We sold the house for much less than it was worth just to be rid of it. The new owners were a young couple who thought they were getting a bargain. I wanted to warn them, but what could I say? That the house was haunted, that something lived in the walls and closets, that it had a taste for ankles and frightening children. I later learned that Roosevelt Park and Woods, just a few blocks from the house, is considered one of the most haunted locations in Owasso. People report seeing shadowy figures there, hearing whispers, feeling watched. I wonder now if whatever was in those woods somehow found its way into my grandmother's house. Or maybe it had always been there, waiting. The new owners renovated extensively. They tore out walls, redid the bathroom where the phantom water ran all night, completely remodeled the closet where the red eyes appeared. They even had a priest come and bless the house before they moved in. I drive by sometimes, though I never stop. The house looks different now. Cheerful yellow siding instead of the faded white we had. New windows, landscaped yard. It looks normal, happy even. But I know what lived there, what might still live there. And on some nights, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I still pull my feet up under me, away from the edge of the bed, away from whatever might be reaching up from below. Story 6. I've been hesitating to write this down for years. Most people I've tried to tell think I'm either crazy or making it up for attention. But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar, or can make sense of what happened. I was working as a junior park ranger at Echo Lake, Colorado back in 2006. It was my second year there, and I was excited about the Easter weekend because my girlfriend was coming to visit. The lake is beautiful in early spring. Still some snow on the mountain peaks, but the trail's starting to clear up. The first sign something was off came about 3 days before Easter. I was doing my morning patrol when I noticed a group of deer unusually close to the ranger station. Not just one or two, but like 15 of them, just standing there. They weren't grazing or moving, just staring toward town. When I approached, they didn't run away like they normally would. They just slowly moved aside, like they were letting me pass. It creeped me out, but I figured maybe someone had been feeding them, which we constantly tell visitors not to do. I mentioned it to Marcus Dalton, the head ranger, during our morning briefing. Instead of dismissing it, his face got serious. "Been seeing weird stuff all week," he said. "Bears coming down too early from hibernation. Fox families abandoning their dens. It's like they're all moving toward town instead of deeper in the forest." Later that day, a hiking group came in saying they couldn't hear any birds on the Aspen Trail. Not a single one. Anyone who's been in those woods knows they're usually full of chickadees and jays. One hiker, an older guy who'd been coming to Echo Lake for 20 years, said it felt like the woods were holding their breath. By Saturday morning, things got stranger. The Connors couple, Mark and Sheila, experienced hikers who practically knew the trails better than some of the rangers, came into the station totally disoriented. They were supposed to be on a simple 4-hour trek on Reflection Loop, a trail they'd done dozens of times. They'd been out for 7 hours and somehow ended up back at their starting point 3 times. "We followed the GPS exactly," Mark kept saying, showing us his device. But it was like the trail kept bending back on itself. The landmarks kept changing positions. His hands were shaking as he showed us his GPS log, which showed them walking in an almost perfect circle, even though the trail is distinctly not circular. That night, I couldn't sleep. My girlfriend texted saying her car broke down in Denver and she wouldn't make it until Sunday. I remember feeling relieved, which made me feel guilty. Something just felt wrong about Echo Lake. Sunday morning came and I had to help set up for the sunrise Easter service at Reflection Point. It's this beautiful overlook where you can see the entire lake. About 50 townspeople showed up, plus some tourists. Pastor Williams was just starting the service when Mrs. Abernathy screamed. Everyone looked at the lake. The water was completely still, like glass, which was unusual for that time of year. But underneath the surface, I still get chills thinking about it. There were dark shapes moving across the lake bed. Not fish. These were person-sized, walking upright. They looked like people strolling along but underwater. Some seemed to be carrying things. Others appeared to be holding hands, like families. "They're just shadows from the clouds," Pastor Williams said, trying to calm everyone, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. That's when Tyler Banks, this 12-year-old kid who was always taking pictures with his new digital camera, started showing people what he'd captured. His mom grabbed the camera from him and gasped. I was standing right next to them, so I saw the images. Clear as day. There were people in old-fashioned clothes walking beneath the lake's surface. The faces, some of them looked familiar. One looked exactly like old Mr. Peterson, who died last winter. Another resembled Mrs. Finch, the librarian who passed away in 2004. The service broke up after that. People were freaking out, arguing about what they'd seen. I went back to the ranger station to report what happened, but the phones weren't working. Neither was the internet. The radio just produced static with occasional whispers that sounded almost like voices. By noon, things were getting chaotic. Tourists trying to leave town reported their cars wouldn't start or would stall out at the town limits. Cell phones either had no signal or would only connect to numbers that the owners didn't recognize, where the person on the other end would sound like someone they knew who had died. I tried calling my mom just to hear a normal voice, but when she answered, she sounded strange. She kept asking me to come to the forest edge, saying she had something important to show me. My mom lives in Arizona and has never been to Echo Lake. I hung up and felt sick to my stomach. That's when the reports of missing children started coming in. 3 kids from different families had disappeared from their yards. All 3 yards were fenced, and parents swore they'd only looked away for a minute. The whole town mobilized to search, but there was this reluctance to go near the forest edge. People kept reporting voices calling to them from among the trees. Voices of grandparents, old friends, lost spouses. Around 4 in the afternoon, Ellie Mason was found wandering near the community center. She's just 7 years old. Her clothes were dry, but she had mud on her shoes that was cracked like it had dried hours ago. She was clutching something in her hand, an antique gold pocket watch. When her parents asked where she'd been, she said she'd followed the Easter Bunny man, who promised to show her where the old town sleeps. The watch had an inscription, "To Jonathan Wells, founder of Echo Lake, 1887. Wells had died in the founding year of the original settlement. I know because there's a plaque about him in the ranger station. An hour later, Peter Kingsley showed up at the community center where everyone had gathered. He's only 8. His parents rushed to him, but stopped short when he spoke. His voice wasn't his own. It was deep, adult, with an old-fashioned accent I couldn't place. "The door is open at Easter when the veil is thinnest," he said. "We've been waiting to come home." Then he collapsed. When he woke up minutes later, he was normal again, with no memory of where he'd been or what he'd said. Hannah Reeves never came back. She was 10. They found her jacket hanging from a tree branch near the lake shore, but no other trace of her. That night, Marcus gathered a few of us in the ranger station with Mayor Phillips and some other town officials. Someone had the idea to look through the historical records kept in the station's basement. What we found chilled me to the bone. Echo Lake wasn't always a lake. Back in 1891, there was a catastrophic flood on Easter Sunday that wiped out the original settlement. The modern lake actually sits on top of the remains of the original town, including its cemetery. When they rebuilt the town, they moved it slightly uphill and rerouted the river that had flooded. The old settlement, including the graveyard where the first generation of settlers were buried, remains underwater to this day. But here's the most disturbing part. We checked the genealogy records. All 3 missing children were direct descendants of survivors from the 1891 flood. And looking deeper, every person who reported seeing a familiar face in the lake or hearing a deceased loved one's voice was related to original Echo Lake families. By Monday morning, the phenomena stopped as suddenly as they had started. Phones worked again. Cars could leave town. The lake was just a lake, but Hannah Reeves remained missing, and the bank's kids' photos had mysteriously corrupted overnight. Nothing but digital static remained. I quit my job the following week. Couldn't stand being near that lake anymore. About a third of the town moved away within the year. Those who stayed developed new traditions. They never celebrate Easter in Echo Lake anymore. Instead, they have a Remembrance Day, where they throw flowers into the lake and recite the names of the original settlers. The official report said Hannah Reeves likely drowned, though her body was never recovered. Ellie and Peter were said to have been temporarily disoriented. The watches and other phenomena were never officially explained. I've done research since then. Apparently in some cultures they believe that boundaries between worlds thin at certain times of the year. Usually it's Halloween or All Souls' Day that gets mentioned, but Easter, with its themes of resurrection and rebirth, has similar associations in some folklore. What I can't explain is why it happened that particular Easter, or why it seemed to focus on descendants of the original settlers, or what exactly the Easter Bunnyman was that Ellie described. A tall figure in old-fashioned clothes with a face like Grandpa's pictures. I've tried to put it behind me, but every Easter I have the same nightmare. I'm walking beneath Echo Lake, passing by houses and shops submerged in water, while people in old-fashioned clothes smile and wave at me. They're always trying to get me to stay, showing me an empty house waiting for me. And in the distance, I can see a little girl playing in what looks like an underwater park. She looks just like the pictures of Hannah Reeves. I've never gone back to Echo Lake, but sometimes I wonder if the door opens every Easter, and if one day there might be too many people on the other side waiting to come through. Story 7. I've been hiking solo for years now. It's my escape, my therapy. When the city gets too loud and people too demanding, I head to the forests of the Pacific Northwest, just me, my pack, and the trees. Most of my friends think I'm crazy going alone, but that's the whole point. Being alone out there helps me think. Late September, I took a week off work for a trek in one of the state-managed forests about 3 hours from Portland. The weather forecast looked perfect. Cool days, chilly nights, and minimal chance of rain. I'd been planning this route for months, studying topo maps and satellite images to find the most remote sections. I'm not one for crowded campgrounds or those Instagram-famous spots where you have to wait in line for a photo. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. I followed game trails when possible, navigating by compass and map more than marked paths. That third day, though, that's when everything changed, and not in a good way. I'd been hiking since sunrise, pushing through a particularly dense section of forest. Around 3 in the afternoon, I came across this small pond that wasn't on any of my maps. It was perfect, crystal clear water, sheltered by towering pines, with a flat, mossy area, ideal for my tent. I figured I'd covered enough ground for the day and decided to make camp early. After setting my pack down and taking a long drink of filtered water, I started gathering wood for a small fire. That's when I heard it. This weird shuffling sound coming from behind a massive boulder at the far end of the pond. At first, I thought maybe a deer or even a bear, but there was something rhythmic about it that didn't seem animal-like. I'm not stupid. I know the wilderness can be dangerous, and not just from wildlife. I grabbed both my knives, the folding one from my pocket and my fixed blade from my pack. I approached slowly, keeping low and quiet, ready for anything, or so I thought. When I rounded that boulder, I almost dropped both knives. There was a couple, completely naked except for their hiking boots, having sex on a thin blanket spread over the pine needles. I froze. They were so caught up in what they were doing, they didn't notice me for several seconds. When they finally saw me, the woman screamed, and the guy scrambled to cover her with the blanket. I backed away immediately, apologizing and feeling like the world's biggest creep, even though they were the ones screwing in a public forest. "Sorry, didn't mean to. I mumbled, retreating quickly back to my pack. I heard them whispering frantically, and a few minutes later they emerged fully dressed. The guy was tall, maybe 6'2", with this disheveled brown hair and a scruffy beard. The woman was shorter, athletic-looking, with long blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. They both looked to be in their late 20s. "Hey man, our bad," the guy called over, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the tension in his voice. "Didn't think anyone would be out here." I nodded awkwardly. "No worries. It's public land, just surprised me is all." The woman wouldn't make eye contact with me. She kept scanning the tree line like she was expecting someone else to appear. "You hiking through or camping?" the guy asked, taking a few steps closer. "Camping tonight," I said, pointing to my half-set-up tent, "heading north tomorrow." He nodded too many times. Cool. We're just set up over there." He gestured vaguely toward a small clearing where I could see a bright red tent. Something felt off, really off. I've encountered other hikers and campers plenty of times before, and there's usually this instant camaraderie, talking about trails, comparing gear, sharing tips, but these two gave off a completely different vibe. They seemed tense, almost fearful. As they walked away, I noticed a few things that didn't add up. Their clothes were clean, too clean for people supposedly camping in the wilderness. The red tent looked brand new, like it had just been taken out of the box. And most concerning, I couldn't see any backpacks, cooking gear, or water containers around their site, just the tent and the blanket I'd caught them on. I considered packing up and moving on, but it was getting late, and the next suitable camping spot was at least 2 hours away. So I finished setting up camp, made a small fire and cooked dinner, all while feeling the weight of being watched. Around sunset, I saw the woman walk down to the pond with a single water bottle, fill it, and return to their tent. No water filter, no purification tablets that I could see. Another red flag. I barely slept that night. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf had me reaching for my knife. Around midnight, I heard them talking in hushed, urgent tones, though I couldn't make out what they were saying. I just lay there, staring at the roof of my tent, wondering who the hell these people were and how they'd gotten out here. See, that's the thing that really bothered me. I'd hiked in from the nearest trailhead, about 15 miles back. There were only 3 other access points to this area, and I'd passed all of them. I hadn't seen any fresh footprints or signs of recent hikers. How had they gotten to this pond with nothing but a tent and a blanket? When morning finally came, I was packed and ready to leave before the sun fully cleared the trees. The red tent was zipped up tight, no sign of movement. I didn't say goodbye. I hiked hard that day, wanting to put as much distance between me and that pond as possible. Around midday, I stopped at a stream to refill my water and eat a protein bar. That's when I got that feeling again, that prickly sensation on the back of your neck when someone's watching you. I spun around, scanning the forest, but saw nothing. Pushing on, I crossed a ridge and descended into a valley I hadn't explored before. I'd planned to camp near another water source shown on my map, a small stream feeding into a larger river system. As I approached the planned campsite around 4 in the afternoon, my blood went cold. There, in a small clearing about 50 yards from where I intended to camp, was a bright red tent, the exact same model as the one by the pond. I stopped dead in my tracks. It couldn't be them. It just couldn't. They'd have had to move faster than humanly possible through rough terrain with no visible gear, and yet the tent was identical. I changed direction immediately, veering east toward higher ground. I hiked until dusk, setting up camp in a less than ideal spot on a rocky slope, but it was defensible. I could see anyone approaching from below. That night was worse than the first. Every sound had me sitting bolt upright. I kept my headlamp and knife within reach at all times. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something moving in the underbrush downslope from my position. Not an animal. The footfalls were too deliberate, too careful. I switched off my headlamp and waited in the darkness, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps circled my campsite once, paused near the head of my tent, then retreated down the slope. I didn't sleep again that night. At first light, I packed up and practically ran down the trail. My planned 7-day trek was cut short. I'd reach my car by nightfall if I pushed hard enough. Throughout the day, I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced I was being followed. Twice I thought I saw flashes of movement through the trees. Once what looked like the woman's blonde ponytail, and later what could have been the man's blue jacket. But when I stopped and scanned the forest, there was nothing. I reached my car just as darkness was falling. The parking area was empty except for my vehicle, exactly as I'd left it. I threw my pack in the trunk, jumped in the driver's seat, and locked the doors, sitting there for a full minute, just breathing. As I was about to start the engine, headlights swept across the parking lot. Another car pulled in, an old red Subaru that had seen better days. It parked 2 spaces away from mine. I couldn't see the occupants clearly in the darkness, but I watched as 2 people got out and opened the trunk, pulling out what looked like camping gear. I didn't wait to see more. I started my car and peeled out of there, gravel spitting from under my tires. It's been 3 months since that trip, and I still can't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong about that couple. Were they fugitives hiding out in the wilderness, thrill seekers getting off on the risk of being caught, or something else entirely? I've searched local news for missing persons or criminal reports, but found nothing that fits. The thing that haunts me most is how they could have possibly gotten to that second campsite ahead of me. I've hiked those woods for years, and there's no way, Absolutely no way they could have beaten me there with no gear and no clear trail to follow. I've gone back to hiking since then, but never alone anymore, and never in that particular forest. Some things just can't be explained, and some people you encounter in the wilderness aren't supposed to be found. That's the lesson I took from it all. That, and to always trust that gut feeling when something doesn't seem right. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear footsteps circling my house, and every time I see a red tent in a camping store or on a trail, my heart races and I have to remind myself to breathe. Whatever I encountered out there, it changed something in me. Some sense of safety or certainty that I used to take for granted. One thing's for sure, I'll never ignore that feeling of being watched again. Because sometimes you're not just being paranoid, sometimes there really is someone there in the shadows, following your every move, waiting for I don't know what. And I hope I never find out. Story 8. I'm not sure if anyone will believe me, but I need to get this off my chest. It's been 15 years since I left Portland, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about what happened there. Back in March of 2007, I got hired by the Portland Police Bureau as their forensic photographer. I'd been doing the same job in Seattle for 15 years, so I had plenty of experience. The move to Portland was meant to be a fresh start after my divorce. New city, same job, less baggage. At least that's what I thought. From the beginning, I felt different about the crime scenes in Portland. I can't explain it, but there was something heavier about them. In Seattle, I'd developed a reputation for catching details others missed. Little things, a partial footprint under a rug, blood spatter in weird places, stuff that could make or break a case. The detectives in Portland welcomed me with open arms because of this. They called me their secret weapon. The homicide division became my second home. I spent more time in their offices and at crime scenes than I did in my sparse apartment. Detective Sarah Linden was the one I worked with most, sharp as hell, didn't miss much. We developed a good working relationship fast. She'd point out what needed photographing, and I'd go above and beyond. The first few months were normal. Well, as normal as photographing murder scenes can be. But around August, I started noticing things. It was subtle at first. When developing the photos, I still preferred darkroom techniques for certain shots. Digital doesn't always capture everything. I'd see what looked like shadows that shouldn't be there. Not dramatic or obvious, just wrong. I thought it was equipment failure or chemical issues. Tried different cameras, different chemicals. The shadows remained. They always appeared in places where shadows shouldn't exist. Corners without light sources, perfectly lit areas where no shadow should form, and they were getting more defined. By September, I could tell they were vaguely human-shaped. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? Hey, Detective Linden, I think I'm photographing ghosts at murder scenes. Yeah, that would go over great. The Pearl District case in early October is when everything fell apart. It was a standard homicide. Wealthy businessman found dead in his high-rise apartment. I took my usual hundreds of photos, documenting everything from multiple angles. When I developed them that night, my hands were shaking so badly I almost ruined the batch. In the corner of the bedroom, there was a shadow. Not just any shadow, a figure, hunched but distinctly human. And in the sequential shots, it moved. Not much, just shifted, like it was watching us work. I must have made some kind of noise because my assistant asked if I was okay. I lied and said I'd burned my finger. I became obsessed with these shadows, started comparing them across different crime scenes. They were always there, but different somehow, different shapes, different postures, like different entities. I started thinking of them as the witnesses, the only ones who saw what really happened. I didn't realize Linden had noticed the anomalies until she cornered me after a particularly gruesome scene in North Portland. "What's with these shadows in your photos, Marsh?" she asked, showing me several prints where I'd caught the figures. I played dumb, suggested it was lens flare or developer issues. She didn't buy it, but she let it go for then. The truth is, I'd been seeing these things before Portland. Back at RISD, I'd focused my thesis on what I called emotional residue in violent spaces. I'd photograph abandoned mental hospitals, old prisons, places with violent histories. Even then, these shadows would appear. My professors thought I was manipulating the images. I wasn't. When I started having the visions, seeing the shadows with my naked eye, I sought help. 3 different psychiatrists diagnosed me with everything from stress-induced hallucinations to schizophrenia. The meds helped dull it, but the shadows remained in my photos, always in my photos. I started experimenting with different development techniques, altering chemical balances, exposure times, trying to enhance what was appearing. I found that certain combinations made the figures clearer, more defined. It sounds crazy, but sometimes I swear they were trying to communicate. I kept a journal, detailed everything, which chemicals brought out which figures, which crime scenes had the strongest presences. I catalogued them, tried to find patterns. The more violent the death, the more distinct the shadow. They clustered around the victims like they were drawn to the pain. I started taking small items from the scenes, nothing that would be missed or compromise evidence, a button, a scrap of wallpaper, a piece of carpet fiber. I'd photograph these items at home and the shadows would appear around them too, like they'd attach themselves to these objects. I kept these photos separate, hidden in my darkroom. By November, I was barely sleeping. The shadows had started appearing in my apartment, at first just in the corner of my eye, but soon they were everywhere, standing at the foot of my bed, in the shower, beside me as I ate breakfast. They never did anything, just watched, waiting. I think Lyndon suspected something was seriously wrong. She'd give me these looks like she was trying to see through me. One day, she casually mentioned she'd been looking into my background, said she was impressed by my RISD work, asked if I still did experimental photography. The way she emphasized those words sent ice down my spine. That night, I went through all my photos again. The shadows were evolving. In the early Portland shots, they were just vague smudges. By October, they had distinct forms. By November, I could see faces, not clear, but there. Hollowed eyes, gaping mouths, they were getting stronger, feeding off something. I started going to crime scenes I wasn't assigned to, breaking protocol, breaking the law. I'd slip in after hours, take my own photographs. The shadows were always there, waiting for me, different at each scene, but always present. I felt like they were guiding me. Then came the night I found myself driving to places I didn't recognize, remote spots in the woods, abandoned buildings on the outskirts of town. I'd black out for hours and come to, with dirt under my fingernails and fresh photos in my camera. Photos of places that looked like crime scenes, but ones I didn't remember. Places where no crimes had been reported, or so I thought. When I developed these photos, the shadows were more solid than I'd ever seen them, almost 3-dimensional, and they were looking directly at the camera, at me. I circled them in red marker, tried to decode what they were showing me. They were leading me somewhere, trying to reveal something. I think Lyndon was on to me by December. She started asking about cases I shouldn't have known about, details only someone who'd been at scenes would know. I made excuses, but I could tell she wasn't buying it. Then she mentioned a search warrant, and I knew my time was up. That night I packed everything, my cameras, my journals, all my photos. I drove out to Crater Lake in a daze. The shadows were in the car with me, more solid than ever. No longer just in the photos, but right there beside me, whispering things I couldn't quite hear. I abandoned my car near the lake, hiked into the woods with my backpack full of evidence. Found a spot that felt right. The shadows showed me where to dig. Not deep, just enough. I buried some of it there, but kept the most important photos with me. The ones that showed what really happened. The ones that proved I wasn't crazy. I've been moving ever since. Different names, different cities, but the shadows follow. They're patient. They found me once. They'll find me again. I'm writing this because I saw Lyndon on the news yesterday. They found one of the sites, the cabin where it all started, where I first realized what the shadows wanted me to see, what they wanted me to document. She was standing there, in front of cameras, talking about cold cases and new evidence. but I was looking at the shadows behind her. 3 distinct figures watching over her shoulder. She can't see them. Not yet, but they're getting stronger. I wonder if she started noticing them in her own photos by now. I wonder if they whisper to her at night like they do to me. The shadows aren't just witnesses, they're something else, something older. They were there before the crimes happened. They'll be there long after we're gone. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep running. They're closing in, both the living and the dead. All I know is that I wasn't just documenting crime scenes. I was documenting something much older, something that lives in the spaces between violence and memory. If you're reading this and you're a photographer, check your crime scene photos carefully. Look for the shadows that shouldn't be there, and if you find them, run. Run before they start showing you things no one should ever have to see. Story 9. Have you never been the type to believe in the paranormal? Ghost stories were fun around campfires, but that's where they belonged, in stories. At least, that's what I thought until last August. Now I don't know what to believe anymore. My boyfriend James works 3rd shift at a manufacturing plant about 20 minutes from our home in Brookfield. We've been living together for almost 3 years in a modest ranch-style house. Nothing fancy, just your typical Connecticut suburban home with 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a finished basement. We have 2 dogs, Max, a German Shepherd mix, and Bella, a corgi who thinks she's much bigger than she actually is. It started on a muggy August morning last year. James had come home from work around 7:30 in the morning and gone straight to bed as usual. I was in the kitchen making coffee before starting my remote work day. Our kitchen has those glossy black appliances that reflect everything like mirrors. I was standing at the counter waiting for the coffee to brew when I caught a reflection in the microwave door. James walking past the kitchen entrance toward the living room. I remember feeling confused because he'd just gone to bed. I called out, "Hey, I thought you were sleeping?" No response. So I followed the figure into the living room, thinking maybe he'd forgotten something or couldn't sleep. The living room was empty. I checked the bathroom, empty. I even looked out the front door, thinking maybe he'd stepped outside for some reason. Finally, I peeked into our bedroom, and there was James, fast asleep under the covers, still wearing the t-shirt he'd come home in. Definitely not the gray tank top I'd just seen in the reflection. I stood there for a solid minute, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I even checked the spare bedroom and office, thinking maybe one of our friends had crashed at our place and I'd somehow forgotten. Nothing. I convinced myself it was just my tired brain playing tricks. I hadn't slept well the night before, so I brushed it off as exhaustion and went about my day. But I couldn't shake the unsettled feeling that clung to me. 7 months passed without incident. I'd almost forgotten about that strange morning until this past March. I was working in our home office, a converted bedroom at the back of the house. Both dogs were with me, Max sleeping under my desk and Bella curled up on the small couch we keep in there. Around 2 in the afternoon, I saw movement in my peripheral vision, someone walking past the office door toward the living room. The figure was wearing James's gray tank top and basketball shorts, his typical post-shower outfit, but James was at his parents' house helping his dad with some yard work. He'd left hours earlier and wasn't due back until dinner. My heart started hammering in my chest. This time I knew I wasn't sleep-deprived or imagining things. Something was in our house. The rational part of my brain tried to come up with explanations. Maybe James had come home early, but I hadn't heard the front door, and his car has a distinctive rumble I always recognize. Something deep inside told me not to follow it this time. Instead, I just said "nope" out loud and turned back to my computer. The dogs hadn't reacted at all, which I found strange. They usually go nuts when James comes home. For the next hour, I heard noises coming from the living room and kitchen, footsteps, the faint sound of cabinet doors closing. I texted James asking if he was home. He replied that he was still at his parents' and would be home around 6. I didn't tell him what was happening. What would I even say? Hey, There's something in our house pretending to be you. I'd sound insane. Eventually, the noises stopped. I stayed in the office with the door closed until James came home. I didn't mention anything to him that night either. Part of me hoped it was just my imagination working overtime. Then came March 22nd. I'll never forget that date as long as I live. I'm paranoid about security, always have been. Every night before bed, I check all the doors and windows twice, making sure everything is locked. I even prop a chair under the front doorknob sometimes when James is working nights. That evening was no different. I'd locked up, put the dogs in our bedroom with me, and locked the bedroom door before going to sleep around 11. I woke up to Max growling, not his playful growl, but the deep, threatening one that makes the hair on my arms stand up. The bedside clock read 8:03. James would be home any minute from his shift, so I figured he was at the front door. Still half asleep, I got up, unlocked the bedroom door, and crawled back into bed, expecting to hear him come in. A few minutes later, I saw the bedroom door slowly push open. From my position in bed, I could see what looked like James peeking in, checking if the door was open. He was wearing his work clothes, dark pants and the navy blue polo with his company logo. He looked in for a second, then turned and walked back toward the kitchen. Max jumped off the bed and trotted after him, tail wagging. Bella stayed curled up at my feet. Something felt off, but I couldn't place what. Then it hit me. I hadn't heard the front door open or close. I hadn't heard his car pull up, and James always calls out, "I'm home," when he walks in. Fully awake now, I got up and followed Max to the kitchen. James always leaves his lunchbox on the counter when he gets home. The counter was empty. A cold feeling washed over me as I rushed to the front window. The driveway was empty. No car. I texted James immediately. "Are you home?" His reply came seconds later. "Just leaving work now. Be home in 20. My entire body went cold. Whatever I'd seen, whatever Max had followed, wasn't James. I gathered both dogs and retreated to the bedroom, locking the door behind us. Max kept looking toward the door, wagging his tail occasionally, as if he could still see someone out there. Bella finally seemed to sense something was wrong and stayed close to me, whining softly. Against all better judgment, I called out through the door, "I saw you and I know you're here. I see that you're listening to us because you changed your clothes." I don't know why I said that last part. It just came out. Maybe because this time it was wearing different clothes than the previous appearances. The house went completely silent, not the normal quiet of an empty house, but an unnatural stillness that felt like something was deliberately trying not to make noise. I stayed on the phone with my sister until James got home 20 minutes later. When I told James everything, he was understandably skeptical at first. He checked the entire house looking for signs of an intruder, but everything was locked and undisturbed. No broken windows, no forced entries, just our secure, ordinary house. Maybe it was carbon monoxide, he suggested. That can cause hallucinations. But we have detectors in every room, and none had gone off. Plus, that wouldn't explain why Max saw it too. Dogs don't hallucinate from carbon monoxide. They just get sick or die. It's been 3 weeks now and I haven't seen the figure again, but I feel it waiting. Sometimes when I'm alone in the house, I'll catch a whiff of James's deodorant when I know he's not home, or I'll hear footsteps in another room only to find it empty. The most unsettling part of all this? I've never seen its face. Not once, only the back of its head, or a profile glimpse. It's like it knows not to let me see its face up close. Like it's not quite ready to reveal itself fully. James suggested setting up cameras, which we did last week. One in the living room, one in the hallway, and one in the kitchen. So far, they haven't captured anything unusual. But I don't think this thing, whatever it is, cares about being seen by cameras. It wants to be seen by me. I've spent hours researching doppelgangers, mimics, and similar phenomena. Most accounts describe seeing a loved one's double as an omen of death or disaster, but nothing bad has happened to James. He's perfectly fine, still going to work, still his normal self. So what is this thing? Why is it pretending to be him? Why our house? Why now? The most rational explanation I can come up with is that we're experiencing some kind of time slip, that I'm somehow seeing James from different points in time, walking through our house. But that doesn't explain why it happens when he's definitely not home, or why it wears clothes he owns but wasn't actually wearing at the times I saw it. Last night, I woke up around 3 in the morning to find Max staring intently at our bedroom door, his ears perked forward. He wasn't growling, just watching. When I asked James if he'd heard anything, he mumbled something in his sleep and rolled over. I lay there for almost an hour, listening for footsteps or any sign that our visitor had returned. Nothing happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just on the other side of that door, waiting, watching, learning. I'm writing this now because I need to document what's happening before I start doubting myself. James is supportive, but I can tell he thinks there's a logical explanation we just haven't found yet. Maybe there is. God, I hope there is. But what if there isn't? What if something has taken an interest in our lives, in him specifically, and is trying to, what? Replace him? Study him? Warn me about something? All I know is that I'm sleeping with the bedroom door locked and both dogs inside with us. And if you have any similar experiences or know what this thing might be, please tell me. Because right now I'm living with the constant fear that one day James will come home from work and I won't know if it's really him walking through our door. Story 10. I still can't sleep without checking my ceiling at least 3 times. It's been 4 months since I left that house, but the scratching sounds follow me everywhere. I've seen 4 different doctors. I've had my hearing checked. There's nothing wrong with me physically, but I know what I heard, what I saw. I just need to get this off my chest. After years of saving and working overtime at the architectural firm, I finally had enough for a down payment on my first house. Nothing fancy, just a 2-story Victorian on Maple Street that needed some TLC. Built in 1938, it had good bones, original hardwood floors, and enough character to make my designer heart happy. The real estate agent mentioned the previous owner had passed away after living there for 40 years, and his children just wanted a quick sale. I got it for $30,000 under asking price. Moving day was exhausting but exciting. My buddy Mike helped me haul furniture, and we celebrated with beers on the front porch afterward. That first night alone in my new house felt like a victory. I remember lying in bed thinking about all the renovations I was going to do, maybe knock out that wall between the kitchen and dining room, refinish the floors, update the ancient bathroom fixtures. The scratching started on the 3rd night. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. Old houses make noises. I knew that going in, but this was different. It wasn't the random creaks of wood expanding and contracting. This was rhythmic, deliberate. Scratch, 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 pause. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Almost like fingernails dragging across wood. I tried to ignore it, pulled the pillow over my head, and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I convinced myself it was probably squirrels or maybe mice in the attic. I made a mental note to call pest control if it happened again. It did happen again. The next night, and the night after that. Always starting around 3 in the morning. Always the same pattern. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Pause. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Sometimes it would go on for 10 minutes, sometimes an hour. I started taking melatonin to help me sleep through it. After a week, I mentioned it to my neighbor, Mrs. Petrovich, a 70-something widow who'd lived next door for decades. "Oh, that old house has always been noisy," she said, watering her geraniums. Edgar, the man who lived there before, he was always up in that attic tinkering with something or other, especially after his wife passed. "Did he ever mention pests, squirrels or raccoons maybe?" She shook her head. "Not that I recall, but after Meredith died, Edgar became quite the recluse, always thought he was hiding something up there." That conversation stuck with me. That night, I tried to locate the attic access. I found it in the hallway ceiling, one of those pull-down ladder situations. I stood under it for a good 5 minutes, listening. Nothing. It was only 6 in the evening after all. The scratching only came in the dead of night. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and tugged on the cord. The ladder creaked as it descended. The air that wafted down was stale and dusty. I hesitated at the bottom rung. Something in my gut told me not to go up there, but I brushed it off as irrational fear. I was a 32-year-old man afraid of an attic. Ridiculous. The space was bigger than I expected, with a peaked roof tall enough for me to stand upright in the center. A single bare bulb hung from a wire, illuminating piles of cardboard boxes, old furniture, and what looked like amateur paintings stacked against the far wall. Nothing unusual. No sign of animals. I walked around, shining my flashlight into corners, checking for droppings or nests. Nothing. I spent about 20 minutes up there, then came back down, feeling silly. Of course, there was nothing sinister about an old attic, just my imagination running wild in a new house. That night, the scratching was louder, more insistent. It wasn't coming from above my bedroom as I'd thought. It was coming from the very back of the attic, from the direction of those stacked paintings. I lay awake until dawn, listening, too afraid to go up and check. The next day was Saturday. I called Mike and asked if he'd come over to help me clear out the attic. Safety in numbers, right? But he had plans with his girlfriend. I considered waiting until he was free, but decided I was being ridiculous. I needed to face this head-on. Around noon, I climbed back up to the attic with a trash bag and some boxes. Might as well sort through the previous owner's stuff while I was up there. Most of it was junk. Old Christmas decorations, broken lamps, magazines from the 80s. The paintings were amateur landscapes, all signed Edgar in the corner. Nothing valuable, but I felt bad throwing away someone's artwork. As I moved the paintings, I noticed something odd about the wall behind them. The wallpaper pattern didn't match. I pressed my hand against it and felt a slight draft. Heart pounding, I pushed harder, and a section of the wall moved inward with a creak. A door, a hidden door disguised to match the wallpaper. I stood there for what felt like forever, just staring at that door. Why would someone hide a door in their attic? What was on the other side? Every horror movie I'd ever seen flashed through my mind, but curiosity won out. I pushed it open. The space beyond was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet. No windows. The air was heavy with a sour smell that made my stomach turn. My flashlight beam revealed peeling wallpaper, a small cot with a stained mattress, and a bucket in the corner. The walls were covered in scratches, thousands of them, some deep enough to expose the wood beneath the wallpaper. And then I saw her. She was sitting on the cot, her back to me. Long grey hair hanging in matted strands down her bony spine. She wore what might have once been a nightgown, now so filthy it was hard to tell. Her fingers were moving against the wall. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Her nails bloody stumps. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. This couldn't be real. "Hello?" I managed to whisper. The scratching stopped. Slowly, so slowly, she turned her head. Not her body, just her head, twisting at an angle that made my skin crawl. Her face, God, her face. Sunken cheeks, cracked lips pulled back from yellowed teeth in what might have been a smile. But her eyes, they were alert, intelligent, filled with a rage so intense it felt physical. "You're not Edgar," she rasped, her voice like sandpaper on stone. I shook my head, unable to speak. Edgar promised no one would find me. Her head tilted further, now at an impossible angle. He promised. I backed up, fumbling for the door handle behind me. "I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone was living here. I bought this house. I can help you get somewhere safe." Her smile widened, splitting her dry lips until they bled. "Safe, I am safe here." The last words came out as a shriek as she lunged from the cot with a speed that defied her emaciated appearance. I fell backward through the door, slammed it shut, and scrambled across the attic floor. I didn't look back as I half fell down the ladder, didn't stop to grab my phone or keys, just ran straight out the front door and didn't stop running until I reached the police station 5 blocks away. The officers were skeptical, of course. They thought I was drunk or high, but something in my face must have convinced them to check it out. 2 officers followed me back to the house. I waited in the patrol car while they went inside. They were in there for almost an hour. When they finally came out, their expressions were grim but confused. "Sir, we searched the entire house, including the attic," the older officer said. "We found the hidden room exactly where you described it. And," my mouth was so dry I could barely form the word, "there's no one there. No sign anyone's been living in that space for years. The room is real. Looks like it might have been some kind of storage space that was walled off. There are scratch marks on the walls, but they're old, probably from animals." "That's impossible. I saw her. I talked to her." The younger officer exchanged a look with his partner. "The house has been empty for months, sir. The utilities were only turned on when you moved in last week. No one could have been living in that attic. They suggested I might have had some kind of stress-induced hallucination, offered to call someone to stay with me. I declined. After they left, I sat in my car for hours, staring at the house. Eventually, I went to a hotel. The next day, I went back with Mike. I needed someone else to see that room. We climbed up to the attic together, but when we reached the spot where the door had been, there was nothing but solid wall. No seam, no hidden latch, nothing. Mike thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. Maybe I am. I put the house on the market the next day, took a massive loss selling it just 2 weeks after buying it. I moved into an apartment across town, left most of my furniture behind. Couldn't stand to bring it with me. But here's the thing. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear it. Scratch, 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 pause. Scratch, scratch, scratch. And sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I swear I can hear her voice, right next to my ear. Edgar promised no one would find me. I don't know who she was. I don't know if she was real or if I'm having some kind of breakdown. All I know is that I'll never forget her face, or the way her head turned, or the hatred in her eyes when she realized I wasn't Edgar. I checked county records last week. Turns out Edgar's wife Meredith didn't die. She disappeared 22 years ago. Police suspected foul play but never found a body. The case went cold. I haven't told anyone this part yet. I'm afraid of what it might mean. Afraid of what I might have seen in that attic. Afraid that somehow she's followed me here. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Story 11. I never wanted to post this online. I've barely even told my closest friends about what goes on in my house. But after what happened yesterday, I think I need to get this out there, partly to warn others, partly just to have someone believe me. Maybe some of you have experienced something similar. I've lived in the same house in Oakwood for almost 25 years now. It sits on what used to be swampland before they drained it for development back in the 60s. The basement was built in the mid-70s, but the upper part is actually an older house they moved from somewhere else. Nobody seems to know exactly where it came from or how old it is. That should have been our first warning sign. From the day we moved in, this place has never felt like home. You know that feeling when you walk into a place and instantly feel comfortable, that sense of belonging? I've never had that here. It's like the house itself doesn't want us. The weirdest stuff started happening almost immediately. My mom would constantly see or talk to someone she thought was me when I wasn't even there. It freaked me out the first time she mentioned it. She came into the kitchen one morning looking confused and asked, "Didn't you just come upstairs wearing your blue sweater?" I was sitting right there in my pajamas, hadn't moved all morning. Another time, this one still gives me chills. My mom went downstairs to ask me something. My bedroom door was closed, but she heard me answer her from inside. When she came back upstairs, there I was watching TV in the living room. I'd been there the whole time. She went white as a sheet when she saw me, and we just stared at each other. Neither of us knew what to say. It wasn't just my mom seeing things. I've heard my stepdad's voice calling me into empty hallways more times than I can count. His voice would sound slightly off, like it was underwater, but still recognizable enough that I'd answer and follow it. I'd turn the corner expecting to see him there, and nothing. Just empty space and that cold feeling that something was watching me. The worst incident with my stepdad happened about 20 years ago. He was taking a nap in their bedroom when he suddenly woke up to see a man standing in the doorway, a complete stranger just standing there staring at him. Before my stepdad could even react, the man said, "I'm not afraid of you," and then just vanished. Like 1 second he was there, the next he was gone. My stepdad wasn't a man who scared easily, but that rattled him badly. Then there was the day my stepdad was diagnosed with cancer 19 years ago. He came home from the doctor, devastated with the news, and was sitting at the kitchen table when he saw 2 women in long, old-fashioned dresses walk straight through the kitchen and disappear through the wall. He told me about it later that night, and I could tell he wasn't making it up. His hands were shaking as he described them. 3 months later, he was gone. Sometimes I wonder if those women were some kind of harbingers. For years, and I mean years, we would all hear the back door open and slam shut in the middle of the night. It has a very distinctive sound, this heavy wooden door with an old spring hinge that makes a certain creak, followed by a solid thud when it closes. We'd hear it at 2 or 3 in the morning, that unmistakable creak, thud. Every single time, someone would get up to check, and every single time, the door would be locked and closed, exactly how we left it before going to bed. I finally got desperate enough to hang a blessed cross on that door about 5 years ago. A friend's mother, who was deeply religious, gave it to me. I'm not particularly religious myself, but I was willing to try anything. Strangely enough, the door noises stopped after that. Not immediately, it happened maybe twice more that week, but then it just stopped. It's the only thing that's actually worked in this house. My great-aunt visited once about 15 years ago. She was only here for a single afternoon. She was sitting in the living room while everyone else was in the kitchen, and suddenly she came rushing in, white as a ghost, saying someone had been calling her name. She insisted it wasn't any of us. The voice had been right next to her ear. She refused to ever come back to our house after that. She's been to every family gathering since, except the ones hosted here. The water issues in this place are beyond explanation. We've had the basement completely flood twice. Not just a little water, I'm talking ceiling high, destroy everything, flooding. We've had water heaters burst, pipes freeze and crack inside walls, washing machine hoses disconnect for no reason, and flood the laundry room. The plumber, who's been out here more times than I can count, finally admitted last year that he's never seen a house with such persistent water problems. He blamed it on the former swampland, said the house was probably built on unstable ground that shifts and affects the plumbing, but I don't think that explains everything. Then there's the ghost cat. That's what we've come to call it anyway. It's solid black, and at least 4 different people have seen it over the years. Me, my mom, and 2 different friends who were staying over. You'll catch a glimpse of it darting around a corner or jumping onto furniture. The first time I saw it, I thought a stray had somehow gotten in, so I tried to grab it. My hand went right through it. It wasn't like mist or anything. It looked completely solid until the moment I touched it. Then it just wasn't there. My friend Jamie saw it sitting on the couch next to her while we were watching a movie. She reached out to pet it, thinking it was my cat. I don't have a cat, and her hand passed through it. She screamed so loud I nearly had a heart attack. Last year, I was doing some renovations in the living room and found something disturbing behind the wallpaper. Fist-sized holes in the drywall, dozens of them, like someone had repeatedly punched the walls in anger. They'd been hastily patched and covered with wallpaper before we bought the place. I later found out from a neighbor that the previous owners got divorced right after selling us the house. Apparently their relationship fell apart while living here. The husband reportedly became increasingly angry and volatile the longer they stayed. I've tried everything to cleanse this house. Sage smudging, salt lines at the doors and windows, having a priest come by, though I couldn't tell him the real reason. Just said we wanted the house blessed. Meditation focused on positive energy. Nothing has made a difference. If anything, things have gotten worse over the years. Yesterday was the breaking point for me. I was home alone sorting through some old photos in the living room. It was about 3 in the afternoon, broad daylight. I heard what sounded like my mom calling me from upstairs, which was impossible because she was out shopping. The voice called my name 3 times, each time getting closer, like whatever it was walking down the hallway toward the stairs. I froze, unable to move. as footsteps started coming down the stairs. Slow, deliberate steps. I could hear the old wood creaking under the weight, but there was nothing visible making those sounds. The steps reached the bottom of the stairs, then started across the living room floor toward me. I could actually see the carpet fibers compressing as if under invisible feet. The footsteps stopped directly in front of me. The air turned ice cold, not just chilly, but the kind of bone-deep cold that makes your teeth ache. Then I felt pressure on my shoulders, like hands gripping me. A voice, not my mom's anymore, but something deeper, rasping, whispered right against my ear. "You know this was our land first." I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The pressure increased until it was painful, like fingers digging into my skin. Then suddenly, it released, and there was a rush of air past me, like something running away. The temperature returned to normal almost instantly. When I finally gathered the courage to look in the mirror, there were red marks on both my shoulders. Perfect fingerprints, 10 of them, like someone had grabbed me hard enough to bruise. They faded after about an hour, but I took photos. I'm looking at them right now, and they still make my stomach turn. I've decided I have to sell this house. I don't care if I take a loss. 25 years is long enough to live with whatever is in here. There's more than one entity. I'm sure of it now. The mimics that pretend to be family members, the man who confronted my stepdad, the women in the old dresses, whatever leaves those footprints, and God knows what else. This place has never been home. It's been a prison shared with things I can't see, but that can definitely see me. The water keeps coming back, no matter what we do. The walls literally weep sometimes when it rains hard, and now whatever's here has physically touched me. I'm done. I've already called a realtor. I just hope whatever is in this house stays here when I leave. I have this terrible fear that after all this time, some part of it might have attached itself to me rather than the property. That maybe I'll never truly be free of this place, no matter how far I run. Story 12. I still can't sleep with the closet door closed. It's been 15 years, but I can't shake what happened that night when I was 10. I've tried therapy, meditation, even those stupid adult coloring books my mom bought me, but nothing helps. I figured maybe writing it all down might do something, so here goes. It was late January, a Friday night. My mom had gone into labor with my sister 2 weeks early, and everything happened so fast. I remember my dad rushing around the house, grabbing the hospital bag while my mom breathed through contractions in the doorway. They hadn't planned for this. Our neighbors who usually watched me were out of town, and there wasn't time to call anyone else. "Nathan, we have to go now," my dad said, kneeling down to my level. "You're a big boy now. Can you stay by yourself for a few hours until Grandma gets here?" She lived about 3 hours away, so I knew I'd be alone for a while. I nodded eagerly. I'd been begging them to let me stay home alone for months. All my friends at school were allowed to, and I felt like such a baby, always needing a sitter. This was my chance to prove I was responsible. "Lock the doors after we leave. Don't answer for anyone. Call us if you need anything. We'll check in every hour," my mom said between breaths. "Grandma has a key. She'll be here as soon as she can." They left in a rush, and suddenly the house on Oak Ridge Drive felt massive and empty. But I wasn't scared. I was thrilled. I made myself a bowl of ice cream, 3 scoops, which was never allowed, grabbed a bag of chips, and set up camp on the living room couch. I put on a movie I wasn't normally allowed to watch and sprawled out, feeling like the king of the castle. My parents called around 9 to say my mom was still in labor, but everything was going okay. They told me Grandma was on her way, but got delayed by road construction. I pretended to be disappointed, but honestly, I was loving my independence. I must have fallen asleep during the second movie because I woke up disoriented around 1 in the morning. The TV was still on, casting blue light across the dark living room. That's when I noticed the shadow. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I saw it shift slightly. A human-shaped darkness visible through the frosted glass panel beside our front door. My heart started hammering against my ribs. Someone was standing on our porch. I froze, remote control clutched in my hand, afraid to move or even breathe. Then I heard it, the soft jiggle of the doorknob. Someone was trying to get in. My mind went blank with panic. I should have called 911 right away, but I wasn't thinking clearly. All I knew was that I needed to hide. I slipped off the couch and crept down the hallway as quietly as possible, wincing at every creak of the floorboards. Our hall closet was narrow but deep, filled with winter coats, shoes, and storage boxes. I squeezed myself inside, pushing past the hanging jackets until I reached the back wall. I pulled a few coats in front of me and crouched down behind a stack of shoe boxes. The closet smelled like mothballs and my dad's cologne. I remember thinking it was weird to notice that while I was terrified for my life. From my hiding spot, I heard a scraping sound at the front door, then a soft click. They were picking the lock. Oh God, they were actually breaking in. This wasn't like the movies where the bad guys give up after trying the door once. The front door opened with a creak that echoed through the silent house. Heavy footsteps entered, not just one person, but several. I could hear them moving around the living room where I'd been just minutes before. "Check upstairs," a man's voice whispered. "I'll take this floor." "Hurry up," another voice responded. "We've got 15 minutes tops." I pressed my hand over my mouth to quiet my breathing. Tears welled up in my eyes as footsteps thumped up the stairs. I heard drawers opening and closing, the sound of things being tossed around. They were tearing apart my home, room by room. The footsteps came closer to the hallway where I was hiding. I could hear someone opening and closing doors. The bathroom, the linen closet, my parents' bedroom. Each sound brought them closer to me. I tried to make myself smaller, pressing against the wall, willing myself to disappear. My legs were cramping, but I didn't dare move. I was sweating despite the January cold, my pajama shirt sticking to my back. The footsteps stopped right outside the closet door. I held my breath as the doorknob turned and light spilled into my hiding place. Through a tiny gap between the coats, I could see a man's silhouette. He was wearing a black ski mask and gloves. He reached in and pushed some of the coats aside, the hangers scraping against the rod. I was certain he would find me. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure he could hear it. One of the hangers was pressing painfully into my cheek, but I didn't dare move. I stared at his gloved hand, just inches from my face. He grabbed my dad's winter coat and felt through the pockets, pulling out some loose change and my dad's work gloves. Then, miraculously, he closed the door. Darkness enveloped me again, and I had to bite my lip to keep from sobbing with relief. "Nothing worth taking in the closet," I heard him say to someone else. For what felt like hours, I listened to them ransack our house. The sounds of destruction were everywhere. Glass breaking, furniture being moved, drawers dumped onto floors. I heard one of them cursing when they found my mom's jewelry box, complaining there wasn't much worth taking. "The phone line's cut?" one asked. "Yeah. Did it before we came in. Checked the kitchen for cash." I hadn't known they'd cut the phone line. My parents' cell phones were with them and I didn't have one yet. I was completely cut off. At one point I heard them in the kitchen directly above where I was hiding in the hallway closet. Footsteps moved back and forth across the ceiling. Cabinets slammed. Something heavy hit the floor with a crash. I flinched with each sound. "We gotta go," someone eventually said. "That's the neighbor's porch light just turned on. Grab that Xbox and let's move." I heard them collecting their things, moving toward the front door. Car doors slammed outside, an engine started, and then the sound faded away. Still, I didn't move. What if one of them had stayed behind? What if they came back? I stayed in that closet for another hour, my body aching, legs numb from crouching for so long. Finally, when the house had been silent for what seemed like forever, I gathered my courage and slowly pushed the door open. The sight that greeted me is burned into my memory. Our living room was destroyed. The TV was gone, cables dangling where it had been ripped from the wall. Couch cushions were thrown everywhere. Picture frames lay shattered on the floor, including the one with my school photo from that year. I stepped on broken glass as I made my way to the kitchen. It looked like a tornado had hit it. Every drawer was pulled out, their contents dumped onto the floor. The cookie jar where my mom kept emergency cash was smashed to pieces. I tried the landline even though I'd heard them say they cut it. Nothing. I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. I remembered my dad had an old cell phone he kept charged in his desk drawer for emergencies. I ran to look for it, praying they hadn't found it. The desk was overturned, papers everywhere, but by some miracle, the phone was still there, wedged between the wall and the desk. My hands trembled so much I could barely dial 911. When the dispatcher answered, I burst into tears. I couldn't form complete sentences at first. She kept asking me to calm down, to tell her what happened. Finally, I managed to explain that people had broken into our house, that I was alone, and that I was scared they might come back. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. I was sitting on the front porch steps, too afraid to stay inside. 2 officers went through the house while another stayed with me. He kept asking me questions, how many people I saw, what they looked like, what they took. I couldn't stop shaking, even though he'd put his jacket around my shoulders. They called my parents at the hospital. My mom had just delivered my sister an hour earlier. Instead of celebrating, my dad had to leave them both to come home to me and the destroyed house. When he arrived, I ran to him and broke down completely. He held me tight, telling me over and over that I was safe, that I did exactly the right thing by hiding. The police couldn't do much. They took fingerprints and filed a report, but told us burglaries like this rarely get solved. They said we were lucky I hadn't been discovered. One officer told my dad quietly that home invasions sometimes turn violent when the burglars find people at home. My parents and sister came home the next day to a house we'd tried to clean up, but was still obviously ransacked. My mom cried when she saw her jewelry box empty, not for the monetary value, but because her grandmother's wedding ring had been in there. The following weeks were a blur of insurance claims and security system installations. My parents never left me alone again, not even for a minute. They installed new locks, motion sensor lights, and an alarm system that beeped every time a door or window opened. But the worst damage wasn't to our house or our belongings. It was what happened to me. I couldn't sleep. Every noise made me jump. I refused to go to school for 2 weeks. When I finally did go back, I had a panic attack in the middle of math class. I started sleeping in my parents' room, on a makeshift bed on their floor. My mom was up every few hours with the baby anyway, so she'd stroke my hair when I woke up screaming from nightmares. In my dreams, the closet door always opened, and the man in the ski mask always found me. We moved 6 months later. My parents said it was because we needed more space with the new baby, but I knew it was because of what happened. They thought a fresh start would help me heal. It's been 15 years. I'm in college now, living in a dorm with 3 deadbolts on my door. I still check closets and under beds. I still wake up sometimes in a cold sweat, certain I hear footsteps in the hallway. And I still wonder, what would have happened if that coat hadn't hidden me completely? What would have happened if they'd looked more carefully? I never feel completely safe. Not anywhere, and I don't think I ever will again. Story 13. I am not a superstitious person. I never have been. 7 years in the Army and 5 more with the Sheriff's Department taught me to trust what I can see, hear, and touch. Evidence, facts, reality. That changed on a Tuesday afternoon in November 2016, and I still can't explain what happened. I was working patrol in Sacramento County, handling a collateral assignment with the CSI team. If you've never worked in law enforcement, collateral assignment means I still did regular patrol but got called to process crime scenes for serious incidents, homicides, suicides, anything where we needed extensive documentation. I was good at the detail work. My supervisors said I had an eye for things others missed. That day started like any other. I got to the station around 6:30, grabbed my gear, checked my patrol car, and hit the streets. It was cold that morning, with a light fog hanging over the fields outside Sacramento. I remember the weather because I was thinking about how it reminded me of my last deployment, those early mornings in Afghanistan when the fog would sit in the valleys. Around 1300 hours, Dispatch sent me to a domestic disturbance at a Safeway about 30 minutes from downtown, small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone's business. I was the closest unit, and backup was at least 15 minutes behind me. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw them immediately, a young Hispanic couple arguing near the entrance. Even from my car, I could tell they were Norteño gang members. The male had the teardrop tattoos, neck tats, the whole nine. I'd dealt with their type plenty of times before. I approached cautiously, hand resting near my weapon. "Sheriff's Department," I called out. "Need you both to separate for me." The guy was belligerent right away. "We ain't doing nothing, man, just talking." The woman had a red mark on her cheek that was already starting to bruise. A couple of shoppers stood nearby, watching. I could feel the tension in the air. "Sir, I need you to put your hands on the wall for me," I said, keeping my voice steady. "This is where things can go sideways fast if you're not careful." Surprisingly, he complied, though he was muttering under his breath the whole time. I patted him down, found a knife in his pocket, nothing illegal about the size, but I secured it anyway. I cuffed him and had him sit on the curb in front of the store. I separated the woman, getting her about 15 feet away. She was reluctant to talk, kept looking over at him. Classic victim behavior in these situations. I positioned myself between them, facing the store with my back to the parking lot. Not ideal tactically, but I needed to keep an eye on both of them. "Mom, I need you to tell me what happened," I said, pulling out my notebook. She was giving me the typical story. "We were just arguing. He didn't hit me. I hit my face on the door. When it happened, a voice, a woman's voice, clear as day, but inside my head, turn around." It wasn't a shout, it wasn't urgent or panicked. It was calm, almost serene, beautiful even, smooth, like water flowing over stones. It reminded me of those AI assistants, but more perfect, more human somehow. In that split second, and I mean literally a fraction of a second, I saw my entire life flash before my eyes, not metaphorically. I actually saw images of my childhood, my parents, my time in the army, my wedding day, and then I saw something else. A Hispanic male, maybe mid-30s, wearing blue jeans, Adidas shoes, and a red plaid long-sleeved shirt. I saw him walking up behind me. I saw him pull a gun. I saw him shoot me in the back of the head. I don't know why I listened. I just did. I turned around, and there he was, exactly as I'd seen him in that flash. Red plaid shirt, jeans, Adidas shoes, about 15 feet behind me, trying to approach quietly. He froze when I turned, his hand hovering near his waistband. My heart rate spiked. The hair on my arms stood up. I felt a cold sweat break out across my back. "Can I help you, sir?" I asked, my hand instinctively moving to my sidearm. He hesitated, then smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Just checking on my friends," he said, nodding toward the couple. I didn't know this guy, but I knew his type. The energy coming off him was wrong. All wrong. Every instinct I had developed over 12 years in uniform was screaming danger. "I need you to leave the area while I'm conducting my investigation," I said, keeping my voice authoritative. He hesitated again, looking at the male suspect sitting on the curb. Some unspoken communication passed between them. "Sure thing, officer," he said finally, backing away slowly. "No problem." I watched him walk about 20 feet away before turning back to the female. "Do you know that man?" I asked. She shook her head, avoiding eye contact. "Never seen him before." I knew she was lying, but I had 2 subjects to deal with and limited options until my backup arrived. I continued my interview, but I kept glancing over my shoulder, trying to keep track of the man in the plaid shirt. He'd stopped at the edge of the parking lot, just watching. About a minute later, it happened again. The voice. "Turn around." And again that flash of images. My life. The man. The gun. But this time, I saw more detail. I saw him pulling a semi-automatic pistol from his waistband. I saw him raise it. I saw myself falling. I spun around, this time drawing my weapon. The man in the plaid shirt was closer now, maybe 10 feet away. His hand was at his waistband. When he saw my gun, he froze. In the distance, I heard sirens. My backup was finally arriving. The man in the plaid shirt heard them too. He backed away, saying, "Whoa, man, I'm just shopping," before turning and walking quickly into the store. I should have detained him at gunpoint. That's what protocol demanded. But something about him, some evil energy I can't fully explain, made me just want him gone. I'd dealt with hundreds of dangerous people in my career, but something about this guy was different, darker. When my partner pulled up, I explained the situation. We searched the store together, but the man in the plaid shirt was gone, vanished. We checked the security cameras later, but he never appeared on any of the footage, which didn't make sense. There was only one entrance to that Safeway. We processed the domestic violence case, arrested the male for battery, and I filed my report, but I never mentioned the voice, never told my partner or my sergeant, never put it in writing. In our line of work, hearing voices is a one-way ticket to a psych evaluation and desk duty, if not worse. I spent the next few weeks looking for that man in the plaid shirt. I checked gang databases, ran down associates of the couple, even drove through known Norteno territories on my off days. Nothing. It was like he never existed. I left law enforcement in early 2017, about 3 months after that incident. Told everyone it was to spend more time with my family, which wasn't a complete lie. But the truth is, that day changed me. Made me question everything I thought I knew about reality. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened. Who was that voice? How did I see those images? Was it some kind of premonition? A guardian angel? Was I actually seconds away from being murdered in a Safeway parking lot? I've replayed that day in my mind thousands of times. I've analyzed it from every angle. I've considered every rational explanation. Stress, fatigue, hypervigilance, but none of them fit. The only thing I know for certain is this: something or someone intervened that day. Something warned me. Something showed me what was about to happen. Something saved my life. And whatever it was, it sounded like the most beautiful voice I've ever heard. I haven't heard it since. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I find myself hoping I will. Not because I want to be in danger again, but because I want to know it was real. That I didn't imagine it. That there's something out there watching over us. Other times, I hope I never hear it again because I know what it would mean, that I'm seconds away from death. My wife thinks I have PTSD. Maybe I do. The dreams haven't stopped. In them, I always see the same thing. The man in the plaid shirt, the gun, the flash. But in the dreams, I don't turn around in time. In the dreams, I feel the bullet enter the back of my skull. I feel the brief, searing pain, and then nothing. I wake up from those dreams drenched in sweat, my hand reaching for a weapon that isn't there anymore. 7 years have passed, and I still check behind me constantly. I still avoid sitting with my back to doors. I still scan every room I enter for men in plaid shirts, and sometimes when I'm alone, I whisper thank you to whoever or whatever spoke to me that day, because I know with absolute certainty that if I hadn't turned around when I did, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. Story 14. I still can't shake what happened last summer in the mountains near Harrison Lake. It's been almost a year, but every time I close my eyes in a tent, I'm right back there. I'm Thomas, by the way. I was 12 when it happened, and it completely changed how I see the wilderness. My dad and I have always been outdoors people. We'd been planning this trip with his friends for months, a proper wilderness experience in the British Columbia backcountry. No campgrounds, no facilities, just us and the mountains. Gary, my dad's friend from work, was turning 40 that weekend, and he wanted to celebrate by getting away from civilization, as he called it. There were 6 of us total: my dad, me, Gary, and 3 other guys my dad knew from his hiking group. Dad had been taking me camping since I was little, but this was my first big boy trip, 5 miles from the nearest road. I remember feeling so proud when Dad told me I was old enough to come along. We hiked in on a Saturday morning last June, following an old hunting trail that eventually disappeared into the undergrowth. The weather was perfect, not too hot, with this amazing crispness to the air that you only get in the mountains. I remember my pack felt heavy at first, but I was determined not to complain. I wanted to prove I belonged with the adults. By mid-afternoon, we reached this beautiful clearing near a small stream. Tall Douglas firs and cedars surrounded us, creating this natural cathedral feeling. The ground was covered in soft pine needles, and there was an old fire ring someone had made years before. Dad pointed out how perfect it was. Flat ground for sleeping, water nearby, and good visibility all around. Gary suggested we sleep without tents since the forecast was clear, and everyone agreed. I was excited about the idea of sleeping under the stars. We set up our sleeping bags in a rough circle around where the fire would be, with our backpacks and food supplies hanging from a tree branch about 30 yards away. Dad had always been strict about proper food storage in bear country. The evening was amazing. We built a fire, cooked these incredible steaks Gary had packed in, heavy but worth it for his birthday, and sat around telling stories. The adults had some whiskey while I sipped hot chocolate. Gary was in great spirits, laughing and joking about turning 40. "It's all downhill from here, boys," he kept saying. As darkness fell, the stars came out in a way you never see in the city. Thousands of them, with the Milky Way stretching across the sky like a highway. I remember Gary saying it was the best birthday he'd ever had. We doused the fire properly around 11 and crawled into our sleeping bags. I fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the hike. But sometime in the middle of the night, I'm guessing around 3 in the morning, I woke up for no apparent reason. The fire had died completely, leaving just the starlight and a sliver of moon. The first thing I noticed was the silence. If you've spent time in forests, you know they're never really quiet. There's always something. Wind in the trees, insects buzzing, small animals rustling in the underbrush. But at that moment, there was nothing. Absolute stillness. No wind. No animal sounds. Nothing. It felt wrong somehow, like the forest was holding its breath. I lay there for maybe 5 minutes, listening to that unnatural silence, feeling a strange heaviness in the air. I remember looking over at the others, just dark lumps in their sleeping bags. Gary was closest to the trees, maybe 15 feet from where I lay. I could hear his light snoring. Something felt off, but I was 12, and I told myself I was being stupid. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep, pulling my sleeping bag tighter around me. The next thing I knew, it was early morning. The first gray light was filtering through the trees. I was awakened by my dad's voice, sounding tense in a way I'd never heard before. "Nobody moved for a second," he said quietly. I sat up, rubbing sleep from my eyes. Dad was standing at the edge of our camp, staring at something on the ground near where Gary had been sleeping. Gary was already up, standing a few feet away with the strangest expression on his face, like he couldn't decide whether to throw up or run away. "What's going on?" I asked, crawling out of my sleeping bag. No one answered me directly. Mike, one of the other guys, just pointed. There, less than 3 feet from where Gary's head had been all night, was a massive pile of bear scat, fresh, steaming slightly in the cool morning air. At first, I didn't understand the significance. We were in bear country, of course there would be bear poop, but then Dad pointed out the tracks. The soft earth around our campsite told the whole story. A bear, and judging by the paw prints, a very large one, had walked directly into our camp during the night. The tracks showed it had approached from the tree line, walked right up to where Gary was sleeping, stood there long enough to defecate, and then calmly walked away, back into the forest. "It was standing right over me," Gary whispered, his face ashen. "Right over me while I slept." The paw prints were massive, easily the size of dinner plates. The rangers later told us it was almost certainly a large grizzly, probably male, and it had stood literally inches from Gary's head while he slept, completely unaware. What hit me hardest was the realization that this had likely happened during those strange, silent minutes when I was awake. The bear had possibly been standing there, looking down at all of us, while I lay in my sleeping bag feeling uneasy about the silence. The silence that I now understood was the forest's reaction to a large predator. The mood changed instantly. No one spoke much as we hurriedly packed our gear. Nobody made coffee or breakfast, though it was barely 6 in the morning. The easy camaraderie from the night before was gone, replaced by this nervous urgency to get moving. I remember watching Gary as he rolled up his sleeping bag. His hands were shaking slightly, and he kept looking over his shoulder at the tree line. Gary, who the night before had been joking and laughing, now looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. He sat down at one point and just stared at the bare scat, like he was trying to process what had happened, or what could have happened. "Why didn't it attack?" I asked my dad as we were packing. He shook his head. "I don't know, buddy. Bears usually avoid humans. But to walk right into camp, right up to someone..." Mike, who had the most wilderness experience among us, said something I'll never forget. It was making a point. This is its territory, not ours. The forest felt completely different to me now. The previous day it had seemed welcoming, beautiful. Now it felt vast and indifferent, not hostile exactly, but unconcerned with us, like we were temporary visitors who could be removed at any moment. The 5-mile hike back to the car was tense and fast. No one wanted to stop for breaks. No one was taking photos or pointing out interesting plants like on the way in. Gary walked at the front, setting a pace that had us practically jogging at times. When we finally reached the parking area, there was this collective exhale, like everyone had been holding their breath for hours. Gary leaned against the car, closed his eyes and said, "I'm never sleeping in the open again." He kept his word too. That was 7 years ago, and Gary has never joined us for another wilderness trip. He still camps occasionally, but only at established campgrounds with rangers and facilities, places with concrete pads for tents and metal food lockers. That day changed my relationship with the wilderness too. I still go camping with my dad. I'm 19 now, but I always bring a tent. I'm obsessive about hanging food properly, and I never ever sleep with my back to the woods. The rangers told us later that bears almost never behave that way. They said we were incredibly lucky that this one was either just curious or simply not hungry. One ranger suggested the bear might have been bluff charging in its own way, letting us know whose territory we were in without actually harming us. Whatever its intentions, that bear taught me something profound about our place in nature. No matter what gear we bring, what precautions we take, or how experienced we are, we remain vulnerable visitors in places where large predators can move with perfect silence and stand over us while we sleep, completely unaware. Sometimes when I'm in my tent at night now, I still wake up to unusual silences, and I wonder what might be standing just outside the thin fabric looking in. Story. I've never been so happy to be back in my cramped apartment. It's been 3 days since I got back from what was supposed to be a relaxing camping trip, and I still can't shake this feeling of being watched. I need to write this down somewhere, just to process what happened, because I honestly don't know what to make of it. I work at this soul-crushing corporate job where I basically stare at spreadsheets for 9 hours a day under fluorescent lights that give me migraines. My boss has been riding me about quarterly projections, and after pulling 3 60-hour weeks in a row, I just needed to get away. No cell service, no emails, no people, just me and the woods. I decided on Pinewood Valley, this public campground about 3 hours from the city. I'd never been there before, but a guy from work mentioned it once. Said hardly anyone goes there because it's pretty bare bones and far from everything. Perfect. I left early Friday morning, drove my old Toyota pickup down this increasingly narrow road until the pavement turned to gravel, then dirt. The GPS lost signal about 20 minutes before I reached the campsite, but the directions I'd written down got me there. It was exactly what I wanted, just a small clearing with a few designated spots, each with a simple fire ring. No bathrooms, except an outhouse about a quarter-mile down a trail, no running water, no camp host, nobody. I picked the spot furthest from the entrance, backed my truck in and set up my tent. It was late afternoon by then, and the place was dead silent except for the birds and the wind in the pines. I gathered some wood from the surrounding area, built a small fire, and settled in with my book. This thriller I'd been wanting to read for months but never had the time. As the sun started to set, I heard a rustling from the bushes. I tensed up. Out here, it could be anything from a raccoon to a bear, but it was just a cat, a dark gray cat with these really intense yellow eyes. It just strolled into my campsite like it owned the place. Now, I've been camping enough to know that seeing a house cat this far out in the wilderness is weird. I figured maybe it belonged to another camper, but I hadn't seen any other vehicles or people. The cat didn't seem feral either. Its coat was clean, not matted, and it had this weird confidence about it. Not scared of me or the fire at all. I called out to it, and it just looked at me, then walked right up to where I was sitting. It didn't have a collar. I had some tuna I'd brought for dinner, so I opened the can and put a little on a paper plate. The cat ate it calmly, like this was a totally normal interaction. After eating, the cat just stayed. It curled up near my tent, not super close to me, but close enough that I could see its eyes reflecting the firelight occasionally. I read until about 11, then went to bed. The cat was still there when I zipped up the tent. I slept pretty well that first night. When I woke up and crawled out of my tent the next morning, the cat was gone. I made coffee on my little camp stove and planned my day. I wanted to hike up to this ridge I'd seen on the map. The hike was great, challenging enough to make me forget about work, with some amazing views at the top. I took a few photos on my camera, no cell service, remember, ate my lunch up there, and headed back down. I got back to camp around 4 in the afternoon. That's when I noticed something off. The firewood I'd collected and stacked neatly next to the fire ring was scattered. Not just knocked over, but spread out in this weird, almost deliberate way, like someone had picked up each piece and placed it in a different spot. I figured maybe a raccoon or something had come through, though it seemed strange. I restacked the wood, made dinner, and settled in for another quiet evening. As it got dark, the cat showed up again, same time as before, emerging from the exact same spot in the bushes. It came right up to me like we were old friends. I gave it some of my beef jerky, which it seemed to appreciate. Just like the night before, it eventually curled up near my tent. I stayed up a bit later that night, watching the stars and stoking the fire. The cat just lay there, occasionally looking at me with those yellow eyes that seemed to glow in the firelight. It was peaceful, but also, I don't know, there was something unsettling about it, like the cat was waiting for something. I crawled into my sleeping bag around midnight. I'd been asleep for a few hours when something woke me up. It was the silence. Normally, there's some ambient noise in the woods at night, insects, an occasional owl, the rustle of nocturnal animals, but it was completely unnaturally silent. Then I heard it, footsteps. Heavy ones circling my tent, slow, deliberate steps that couldn't possibly belong to the cat. Whatever it was big, and it was walking around my tent in a perfect circle. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. I reached for my flashlight, but was too terrified to actually unzip the tent and look outside. The footsteps continued for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes. Then they stopped, right in front of my tent door. I could sense something standing there, waiting. I heard heavy breathing, not animal-like, more human, but somehow wrong. Eventually, the footsteps moved away, fading into the woods. The night sounds gradually returned. Crickets, the soft hoot of an owl. I didn't sleep again that night. I just lay there, clutching my flashlight, waiting for dawn. When the first light finally filtered through my tent, I cautiously unzipped the door and peered out. The cat was gone again, but what I saw made my blood run cold. Footprints, dozens of them. Human footprints circling my tent, exactly where I'd heard the footsteps. But here's the really fucked up part. They weren't all the same size. Some were large, like a man's boot print. Others were smaller, like a woman's or even a child's. But they were all bare feet. No shoe prints, just bare human feet in the dirt, making a perfect circle around my tent. I stumbled out, heart racing, and examined the prints more closely. They were clear and well defined in the soft dirt. Too clear. almost like they'd been pressed into the ground with force, and there were no footprints leading to or away from the circle. It was as if whatever made them had appeared out of nowhere, walked around my tent, and then vanished. That was it for me. I didn't care about my planned third night. I was getting the hell out of there. I started breaking down camp as fast as I could, constantly looking over my shoulder. The entire time, I had this overwhelming sensation of being watched from the tree line. I was shoving my sleeping bag into its stuff sack when I spotted something at the edge of the clearing, near where the cat had always emerged from, a small gray form lying motionless. My stomach dropped. Against my better judgment, I approached it. It was the cat, lying on its side, completely still, dead. I knelt beside it, feeling sick. Its eyes were open, those yellow eyes now dull and lifeless. I gently touched its fur, and that's when I felt something strange beneath the skin on its back between the shoulder blades. I parted the fur and saw a small, barely noticeable incision, partially healed. Something was under there. Using my pocket knife, I carefully widened the cut. I know that sounds messed up, but I had to see what it was. What I found still gives me nightmares. There was a thin, wire-like filament embedded under the skin, connected to a small metallic disc about the size of a dime. It wasn't like any tracking chip I'd ever seen put in pets. This was something else entirely. The disc had tiny, intricate circuitry on it that looked far more advanced than anything I'd expect to find in a stray cat. And the wire extended further into the cat's body, toward its head. I didn't have the stomach to follow it. I took a few shaky photos with my camera, my hands trembling so badly I wasn't sure they'd come out. Then I heard a crack from the woods behind me, a twig snapping. I spun around but saw nothing. That was enough. I ran back to my campsite, threw the rest of my gear haphazardly into the truck, and got the hell out of there. The entire drive back, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being followed. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see I don't even know what. When I finally got cell service again, I pulled over and frantically searched online for information about animal tracking devices. Nothing I found looked remotely like what I'd seen in that cat. It's been 3 days, and I still can't make sense of it. Who put that device in the cat? What were those footprints? Why did they circle my tent? And most disturbing of all, was the cat monitoring me, or was something else monitoring both of us? I developed the photos yesterday. The footprints are clearly visible, forming that perfect circle. The ones of the cat and the device are blurrier than I'd hoped, but you can still make out the metallic object and wire. I haven't told anyone about this yet. It sounds too crazy, but I know what I saw, what I touched. I haven't been sleeping well. Every noise outside my apartment window makes me jump. And sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, I swear I can hear those heavy footsteps again, circling, always circling. Story 16. I still can't explain what we found that day. It's been 3 years, and I still get this weird chill whenever I see a package of Skittles or a hiking backpack. I've tried to make sense of it, tried to come up with some rational explanation, but nothing fits, nothing at all. It happened during a camping trip with my buddy Greg back in the summer of 2019. We're both pretty experienced outdoorsmen. We've been camping and hiking together since college. This particular weekend, we were looking for somewhere really remote, somewhere we could just disconnect from everything. Greg had heard about this campsite from a coworker, way up in the mountains, accessible only by a brutal 4x4 track that wasn't even on most maps. It took us almost 3 hours of driving on progressively worse roads to reach it. The last 5 miles were so rough I thought my Jeep's suspension was going to give out. We hit ruts so deep that at one point Greg had to get out and guide me through. When we finally arrived, it was early afternoon. The place was exactly what we wanted. Completely deserted, with just a few fire rings and some weathered picnic tables scattered around a small clearing. The forest pressed in close, mostly pine and spruce, with that deep quiet you only get when you're truly away from civilization. "Dude, this is perfect," I said, stretching after the long drive. "Not a soul for miles." Greg nodded, looking around the site. "Looks like nobody's been here in weeks. I'm gonna check if there's an outhouse or something." While he wandered off, I started unloading our gear. We'd packed for 5 days. Tent, cooler, food, the works. I was setting up our camp when Greg came jogging back, a weird expression on his face. "Hey, you need to come see this," he said. There was something in his voice that made me stop what I was doing. "What's up? Bear sign?" I asked, immediately thinking of potential dangers. "No, just, you need to see for yourself. There's a couple of outhouses down that trail." He pointed to a narrow path leading downhill from our campsite. "Check out the first one." I followed him down the path, wondering what could be so interesting about an outhouse. The path led about 50 yards through dense trees before opening up to a small clearing with 2 wooden outhouses, the old-fashioned kind, weathered gray from years of exposure, with crescent moons carved into the doors. They looked ancient and not particularly inviting. "It's in the first one," Greg said, hanging back a bit. I approached the outhouse, noticing that the door was slightly ajar. There was no lock, just a simple wooden latch. I pulled the door open wider, and the hinges creaked loudly in the silence. The smell hit me first, that typical outhouse smell, but mixed with something sweet that seemed completely out of place. As my eyes adjusted to the dimness, I saw them. 3 large backpacks were sitting on the floor of the outhouse, lined up neatly against the back wall. Not just any backpacks, these were serious expedition packs, the kind used for multi-day or even week-long trips, high-end brands that cost several $100s each. They were just sitting there in an outhouse, in the middle of nowhere. "What the hell?" I muttered, stepping inside for a closer look. The backpacks were all different colors, one dark blue, one green, and one bright red. They looked clean and relatively new, not like they'd been abandoned for long. I glanced at Greg, who was watching from the doorway. "Did you look inside them?" I asked. "Just the first 2, he replied. "Open them up." I unzipped the blue backpack first. Inside was exactly what you'd expect for a serious hiking trip: a compact sleeping bag, cooking equipment, a change of clothes, water filtration system, first aid kit, everything meticulously organized. Nothing unusual except for the fact that it was abandoned in an outhouse. The second backpack, the green one, was similar. Standard camping gear, all high quality, all neatly packed. There was even a wallet with some cash in it, but no ID that I could find. It was like someone had packed for a long trip and then just left everything behind. But it was the third backpack that really freaked me out. I unzipped the red backpack and stepped back in shock. It was filled, and I mean filled, with Skittles candy. Not just a few packets, but dozens upon dozens of them. The entire backpack, which must have been about 80 liters in capacity, contained nothing but Skittles. Every variety you could think of: regular, tropical, sour, wild berry, dessert, orchards, small snack-sized bags, regular packs, family-sized packs, bulk bags. Some were loose, some were still in their packaging. It was like looking into some bizarre candy dimension. "What the actual fuck?" I whispered, staring at the rainbow of candy before me. I looked back at Greg, who was shaking his head in disbelief. "That's what I said. Who does this? Why would someone hike all the way out here with 3 expensive backpacks and leave them in an outhouse? And why is one of them full of nothing but Skittles?" The questions hung in the air between us, unanswerable. We checked the second outhouse too, but it was empty. Just a normal, disgusting backcountry toilet. We decided to leave everything exactly as we found it. I carefully zipped up all 3 backpacks and placed them back against the wall of the outhouse. It felt wrong to take anything, like we were disturbing a crime scene or something, because that's what it felt like. Not necessarily criminal, but deeply, fundamentally wrong. People don't just abandon thousands of dollars worth of gear, and they definitely don't fill a backpack with Skittles and leave it in an outhouse in the middle of nowhere. As we walked back to our campsite, the forest seemed different somehow. The peaceful solitude now felt oppressive, watchful. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following us. "Should we leave?" I asked Greg when we got back to camp. He thought about it for a minute. "I don't know. It's weird as hell, but it doesn't seem dangerous. And we drove all this way." In the end, we decided to stay. We had the place to ourselves, and despite the strange discovery, it was a beautiful spot. We figured maybe the owners of the backpacks would show up at some point and explain the whole thing. They never did. We stayed for 4 nights, and during that entire time, we didn't see another living soul. No cars came down the road, no hikers passed through, no one claimed the mysterious backpacks. Every morning and evening, one of us would walk down to check the outhouses, half hoping the backpacks would be gone, half dreading what else we might find. But they remained exactly as we'd found them, like some bizarre art installation in the wilderness. I couldn't stop thinking about those backpacks, especially the one filled with Skittles. I came up with dozens of scenarios to explain it, each more unlikely than the last. Maybe it was some kind of drug drop that went wrong. Maybe it was an elaborate prank. Maybe someone had a mental breakdown in the woods. None of the explanations felt right. On our 3rd night there, I had trouble sleeping. The tent felt too thin, too permeable. Every rustle in the forest had me straining to listen. Around 2 in the morning, I distinctly heard footsteps outside, the unmistakable sound of someone walking around our campsite. I nudged Greg awake, and we both lay there, hardly breathing, listening to the soft crunch of pine needles under feet. But when we finally worked up the courage to unzip the tent and look outside, flashlights in hand, there was nothing there. No footprints in the soft dirt around our tent, no sign that anyone had been there at all, just the dark forest and the millions of stars overhead. By the 4th night, the whole situation had gotten under my skin in a way I can't really explain. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a deep unease, a sense that I was missing something important. I kept thinking about those backpacks sitting in that outhouse. Who would leave them there? Why Skittles of all things? It was like a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit together. On our final morning, we packed up camp in record time. Neither of us said it out loud, but we were both ready to leave. Before we left, I made one final trip to the outhouse. The backpacks were still there, undisturbed. I stood there for a long moment, staring at them, almost wishing they would reveal their secret. But they remained stubbornly mysterious. As we drove away, bumping back down that rough road, I felt a mixture of relief and frustration. Relief to be leaving that strange place behind, but frustration at the lack of answers. When we got back to town, we reported what we'd found to the local conservation officers. They took our information and noted the location of the campsite, but they didn't seem particularly concerned. Lost property, they said. They'd look into it. We never heard back from them. It's been 3 years now, and I still think about those backpacks sometimes. Greg and I have talked about going back, just to see if they're still there, but somehow we never get around to it. Part of me doesn't want to know. The thing that bothers me most isn't the abandoned gear, valuable as it was. It's the Skittles, the sheer quantity of them, the deliberateness of it. Someone had to specifically fill that entire backpack with Skittles. Why? What message were they trying to send? What was the point? I've had some scary experiences in my life. A close call with hypothermia on a winter hike, a near miss with a drunk driver, a home invasion while I was away that left my apartment ransacked. But nothing has unsettled me quite like those backpacks in that outhouse. Because the truly disturbing things in life aren't always overtly threatening. Sometimes they're the things that make no logical sense. The things that suggest there's a reality operating alongside ours that follows different rules, the things that leave you wondering what exactly you've stumbled into. I still don't eat Skittles. I can't even look at the packages in the grocery store without feeling that same unease creeping back. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but if you'd seen what I saw, that massive backpack filled with nothing but candy, abandoned in the middle of nowhere, you'd understand. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some questions are better left unanswered, but I still wonder who they were and what happened to them, and why they left behind so much candy in that lonely outhouse in the woods. Story 17. I've been avoiding talking about this for years now. I don't tell people much about it because it sounds crazy and I hate the way they look at me, but I need to get this off my chest. I used to be an avid camper. I'm talking 10 to 15 trips a year into the backcountry. I loved the isolation, the quiet, the feeling of being completely disconnected. Now, I don't even like hiking on trails, unless there are at least a dozen cars in the parking lot. It happened about 5 years ago. I was going through a rough patch, bad breakup, stressed at work, the usual crap. I just needed to get away, clear my head. So on a Thursday afternoon, I threw my gear in my truck and decided to head to this spot I'd found years earlier when I was exploring old logging roads. It was about 3 hours from my house, completely off the grid. No designated campgrounds, no marked trails, no cell service. Just a small basin near a rocky creek surrounded by dense forest. I'd only been there once before, but I remembered thinking it was perfect. Private, quiet, beautiful. I parked at the end of this overgrown dirt road, hadn't seen another car for the last hour of driving. I had to hike about 2 miles to reach the spot. It was late afternoon by the time I got there, maybe around 4 or 5. The weather was perfect, not too hot, slight breeze. I set up my tent in this small clearing about 50 feet from the creek, gathered firewood, and got a small fire going before sunset. That first night was exactly what I needed. I cooked some ramen with canned chicken over my portable stove, had a couple beers I'd packed in, and just sat by the fire watching the stars come out. The only sounds were the crackling fire, the creek, and occasional rustling in the underbrush, probably squirrels or raccoons. I turned in around 11, feeling more relaxed than I had in months. I woke up the next morning feeling refreshed. After breakfast, instant coffee and oatmeal, I decided to explore the area. I followed the creek upstream for a while, then looped back through the woods. Nothing unusual, just typical forest. I saw plenty of deer tracks in the mud near the creek, and what looked like some older black bear prints, but that's normal for that area. I spent most of the day just wandering, taking photos, sitting by the creek, reading this paperback thriller I'd brought. As the sun started going down, I headed back to camp to get dinner going. That's when things started feeling off. I was heating water for my freeze-dried meal when I heard it, the distinct sound of heavy branches breaking on the other side of the creek. Not the little snaps you hear when squirrels or birds move through trees, but the kind of noise something big makes. My first thought was deer or maybe a black bear, so I stood up and looked across the creek toward the sound. That's when I saw it. Just for a second, between the trees, maybe 100 yards away, a tall shape, upright. I only caught a glimpse before it moved behind a thick stand of pines, but it wasn't moving like a bear. Bears sometimes stand up, yeah, but this thing was already upright and moving that way. My brain immediately went to, it's another hiker. But something felt wrong. I hadn't seen any fresh tracks on my hike, and this spot was seriously remote. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" but got no response. The forest went completely silent. You know that unnatural quiet that happens when something is wrong? No birds, no insects, nothing. I stood there for a good 5 minutes, staring into the trees, but whatever it was didn't reappear. I told myself it was probably just a deer that looked weird in the fading light, or maybe another hiker who didn't want to socialize. I finished making my dinner, but I couldn't shake this crawling sensation on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. Every few minutes, I'd glance up at the tree line across the creek, but I never saw anything else. That night, I had trouble falling asleep. I kept hearing noises outside, sticks breaking, rustling. Normal forest sounds, but they seemed closer to my tent than they should be. When I finally did drift off, I woke up suddenly at exactly 2 in the morning. I know because I checked my watch. I was instantly, completely alert, not groggy like a normal midnight wake-up. Something had woken me, but I couldn't figure out what. I laid there in my sleeping bag, listening. The forest was dead silent, not even wind, just absolute stillness. I had this overwhelming feeling that something was right outside my tent, just standing there. I know how that sounds, but I swear I could feel a presence. I didn't have a gun with me, just a hunting knife, which I gripped under my sleeping bag while straining to hear any movement. After what felt like hours but was probably 15 minutes, I heard something moving away from my tent. Slow, deliberate footsteps, not an animal, something walking upright. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When dawn finally came, I unzipped my tent and looked outside. What I saw made my stomach drop. My hiking boots, which I'd left in the vestibule of my tent, had been turned around. I always point them outward so I can slip them on easily, but now they were facing inward, toward the tent. The pot I'd used for cooking was moved from where I'd left it by my camp stove to the edge of my campsite, near the trees. My food bag, which I'd hung from a branch about 20 yards from my tent to keep it away from bears, was still there, but the cord I'd used to hang it was tied differently. I use a specific knot I learned in the Boy Scouts, but now it was secured with a knot I didn't recognize. Then I saw the footprints, a complete circle around my tent. Boot prints, not mine. Mine have a distinct tread pattern I recognize, and these were different, larger, deeper. Someone had walked around my tent while I slept, had stood outside while I was awake in the night, had touched my things. I was supposed to stay another night, but there was no way that was happening. I packed up my camp faster than I ever have before, constantly scanning the trees. I kept my knife in my pocket with the blade open. The whole time, I had that same feeling of being watched. I decided not to go back the same way I'd come in. If someone was following me, I didn't want to take the obvious route back to my truck. So I headed upstream, planning to loop around and hit the logging road about a mile above where I'd parked. It meant harder hiking through unmarked forest, but it felt safer than taking the same path. The whole hike out, I kept looking over my shoulder, stopping to listen. Every time I heard a sound, my heart would race. It took me almost 3 hours to reach the road, but when I finally did and saw my truck sitting there undisturbed, I almost cried with relief. I threw my pack in the back and got the hell out of there. I didn't even change out of my dirty clothes or boots. I just wanted distance between me and whatever was in those woods. When I got home, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was another hiker who was just as surprised to find someone else in that remote spot. Maybe they were curious and checked out my camp while I was exploring during the day. Maybe I'd been half asleep and misremembered how I'd left my boots or tied that knot, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. So I started researching. I looked up news reports from that area, going back a few years, and that's when I found it. An article from a local paper about a hunter who had disappeared in those same woods 2 years earlier. He had parked on the same logging road I used, went into the forest alone, and vanished. Search and rescue combed the area for weeks. They found his truck, followed his initial trail, but then nothing. No body, no equipment, no signs of animal attack. He simply disappeared. The article mentioned that his family insisted he was experienced and would never have gotten lost. The search was eventually called off when winter hit, with authorities concluding he must have fallen into a ravine or suffered a medical emergency in a spot the searchers missed. But I can't help wondering if he encountered what I did, if he was watched, followed, and then... What? I don't know. I never actually saw who or what was observing me. I never had a direct confrontation, but I know something was there, something that wasn't right. I've tried talking to a few friends about it, but they always suggest logical explanations. Another hiker playing a prank, a forest ranger checking on illegal camping, my imagination running wild after too many days alone. Maybe they're right, but they weren't there. They didn't feel what I felt. These days, I stick to popular trails and established campgrounds. I never hike alone anymore. I've bought a more powerful flashlight, a better knife, and I keep bear spray in my pack, though I'm not convinced it was a bear I encountered. Sometimes I wonder if I should report what happened, but what would I say? That someone or something moved my boots and retied my food bag, that I felt watched? There's no crime to report, no evidence to share. All I know is that there are places in the wilderness where you can disappear and no one would ever know what happened to you. Places where the normal rules don't seem to apply. Places where being watched is more terrifying than being attacked, because at least with an attack, you know what you're facing. I still don't know what was out there in those woods, but I know enough to never go back and find out. Story 18. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. Growing up, I'd roll my eyes whenever someone would start telling ghost stories at sleepovers. I was always the skeptical kid who'd find logical explanations for everything weird that happened. But there's one experience from my childhood that I still can't explain, no matter how much I try to rationalize it. I was 11 years old at the time. It was summer break, one of those perfect days in late June when the sky is impossibly blue and there's not a cloud in sight. I remember it was a Wednesday because my mom worked late on Wednesdays, and I had the house mostly to myself except for my older siblings, who were usually doing their own thing. That day I was shooting hoops in our driveway. We had one of those portable basketball hoops that my dad had filled with sand to keep it from tipping over. I wasn't particularly good at basketball, but I enjoyed practicing by myself, imagining I was making game-winning shots while providing my own commentary under my breath. It must have been around noon. The sun was directly overhead, casting barely any shadows. I remember the heat radiating off the concrete driveway, making the air shimmer slightly. I was wearing my favorite blue shorts and a white t-shirt that was already damp with sweat around the collar. I'd been outside for maybe an hour when my brother came downstairs. He's 10 years older than me, so he was 21 at the time and home from college for the summer. He could be pretty strict sometimes, taking on a parental role when our parents weren't around. "What are you doing outside?" he called from the front door, his voice sharp with annoyance. "You know you're supposed to ask permission before going outside when Mom's not home." I didn't remember that being a rule, but I didn't want to argue. My brother had a temper, and I knew better than to talk back. I picked up my basketball and trudged toward the house, shoulders slumped. "I was just playing basketball," I muttered as I passed him. "Don't give me attitude," he said, holding the door open. "Go put that ball away and then come to the laundry room. I need help folding clothes." Our house had a split-level design. When you entered from the front, you could either go upstairs to the main living area or downstairs to a finished basement where we had a family room, a bathroom, and the laundry room. I dropped the basketball in the hallway closet and headed downstairs. The laundry room was at the far end of the basement, connected to a small bathroom. It was always cooler down there, which was nice after being in the sun. The room smelled like detergent and fabric softener. My brother was already there, pulling clothes from the dryer. "You can't just go outside whenever you want," he started lecturing me as I entered the room. "What if something happened to you? Mom would kill me if she found out I wasn't watching you properly." I stood there with my arms crossed, not really listening. My brother could go on forever when he was in lecture mode. The laundry room had one small window near the ceiling that let in a rectangle of sunlight. Dust particles floated in the beam of light. The washing machine was making that weird clicking sound it always made when it was finishing a cycle. That's when I saw it. From the corner of my eye, I noticed something tall walk past the laundry room doorway in the hallway. At first, my brain didn't process what I was seeing because it made no sense. It looked like some kind of dark ape or gorilla, but it was walking upright on two legs. It had long arms that swung with each step, and it moved with a slow, deliberate gait that seemed heavy, like each footstep had weight to it. But here's the really weird part. It was wearing clothes, not just any clothes, but what looked like a complete marching band uniform. I could make out a dark jacket with brass buttons down the front, and it was wearing one of those tall hats that marching bands wear. I think they're called shakos. Most bizarre of all, it had a large white drum strapped to its chest. The thing didn't look at us or acknowledge us in any way. It just marched past the laundry room doorway and into the bathroom that connected to the laundry room. I heard no sound from its footsteps, which should have been impossible given its size and the hollow-sounding drum it was carrying. I froze completely. My mouth went dry and I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body. I tried to say something to my brother, who was still talking about responsibility and rules, but no words came out. I just stood there, my eyes fixed on the bathroom door where the thing had gone. "Are you even listening to me?" my brother asked, snapping his fingers in front of my face. I finally managed to point weakly toward the bathroom. Did you see that?" I stammered. "See what?" He looked annoyed, probably thinking I was trying to change the subject. "Something just went into the bathroom," I whispered. It was big and black and wearing a band uniform. My brother's expression changed from annoyance to concern. "What are you talking about? Nobody went in there." "I swear," I insisted, my voice trembling. "It was like a gorilla or something, but walking like a person, and it had a drum." He looked at me like I was crazy. "A gorilla with a drum? Are you serious right now?" Before I could respond, we both heard a scream from upstairs. It was my sister's voice. She was 16 at the time and had been in her bedroom on the main floor, which shared a wall with the bathroom downstairs. "Something just went into the bathroom," she yelled. Her voice was high-pitched with panic. My brother and I looked at each other, and then we both ran upstairs. We found my sister in the hallway, pointing downstairs. She was pale and shaking. Our cousin, who was visiting for the week, was standing beside her, looking confused. "What happened?" my brother asked, his voice now serious. "I was in my room, and I saw something through the vent," my sister said, her words coming out in a rush. "It was big and dark, and it went into the bathroom downstairs. I could see it through the floor vent. My blood ran cold. My sister's bedroom had a vent in the floor that looked down into the bathroom. She would have had a different angle than me, but she had seen the same thing." "What did it look like?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Like some kind of animal," she said, "but it was wearing clothes, like a uniform or something, and it had a drum. It went right into the shower." My brother's face drained of color. He looked at me, then back at my sister. "You didn't hear us talking about this downstairs, did you?" he asked her. She shook her head. "I had my headphones on until just now. I only took them off when I saw that thing." The four of us went downstairs together. My brother insisted on going first, with me behind him, then my cousin and my sister trailing at the back. When we reached the bathroom door, my brother hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The bathroom was empty. It was a small space with a sink, toilet, and a shower with a white plastic curtain. My cousin, trying to be brave, stepped forward and yanked the shower curtain back. Nothing. The shower was empty, the white porcelain tub dry and clean. There were no wet footprints on the floor, no sign that anything had been there at all. "I swear I saw something," my sister said, her voice small. "Me too," I added. "It came right past the laundry room and went in here." My brother and cousin searched the entire basement but found nothing unusual. We even checked outside, thinking maybe someone in a costume had somehow entered and exited our house, but all the doors and windows were locked from the inside. That night, none of us slept well. My sister and I compared what we'd seen, and our descriptions matched perfectly. A dark, ape-like figure in a navy blue marching band uniform with brass buttons, a tall hat with a plume on top, and a white drum strapped to its chest. It walked slowly, deliberately, with a strange, heavy gait, and neither of us heard any sound from it. No footsteps, no drum beats, nothing. The weirdest part was how specific the apparition was. If our minds were playing tricks on us, why would both my sister and I hallucinate the exact same bizarre image? Why a marching band gorilla, of all things? We didn't even have a connection to marching bands. No one in our family played an instrument, and our school didn't have a marching band program. Over the years, I've tried to find explanations. Carbon monoxide poisoning can cause hallucinations, but would it cause two people to see the exact same thing and we didn't have any other symptoms? Mass hysteria doesn't explain it either, since my sister didn't know what I had seen before she described her experience. It's been almost 20 years now, and I still remember every detail vividly. The dark, fur-covered body, the slow, deliberate walk, the brass buttons gleaming on the navy uniform, the tall hat, and the white drum. Sometimes I wonder if my sister and I accidentally glimpsed something from another dimension or time that somehow slipped into our reality for just a moment. We never saw the marching band apparition again. We lived in that house for 5 more years before my parents sold it, and nothing similar ever happened. I've researched local history, looking for stories about marching bands or performers in the area, but found nothing that could explain what we saw. To this day, when I hear a drum beat or see a marching band, I get an involuntary chill up my spine. I still don't believe in ghosts, not really, but I know what I saw, and I know my sister saw it too. And I've never found a rational explanation for the marching band ape that silently paraded through our basement that sunny Wednesday afternoon. Sometimes I think about contacting the current owners of the house to ask if they've experienced anything strange, but I always stop myself. What would I even say? Have you by any chance seen a gorilla in a marching band uniform walking through your bathroom? They'd think I was completely insane, so I just keep this story to myself, only sharing it anonymously like this. If anyone has experienced something similar or has any insights, I'd genuinely like to hear them, because 20 years later, I'm still completely baffled by what happened that day. Story 19. I don't usually share personal stuff online, but this has been eating at me for years and I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it. This happened about 8 years ago when I was 15. I lived with my parents, my grandmother, and my baby brother Liam in Oakville in this old shotgun-style house. You know the type, where all the rooms connect in a straight line, one after another. Our house wasn't huge, but it was cozy. My bedroom was at the very end of the hallway, past the living room and my parents' room. It was a Saturday in late October. The weather was finally cooling down and my mom was outside tending to her garden before winter set in. She's always been obsessed with her plants, and fall was her busiest season, preparing everything for the cold months. My grandmother was in the living room watching her Chinese soap operas with the volume way too loud, as usual. Dad was working overtime at the restaurant, so it was just us four at home. I was sitting at the kitchen table, struggling through my algebra homework. I remember it clearly because I had a test on Monday that I was totally unprepared for. The kitchen had this big window overlooking the backyard, and I could see my mom out there in her wide-brimmed hat, kneeling by her vegetable patch. Liam was 18 months old at the time. He was such an easy baby, the kind that could literally fall asleep anywhere. Mom had put him down for his afternoon nap in my room because his room was being painted that week. The paint fumes were too strong, so we'd temporarily moved his crib into my bedroom. I didn't mind sharing my space with him. He was this chubby-cheeked little guy with the biggest brown eyes you've ever seen. I'd been working on the same math problem for what felt like forever when I realized my throat was dry. I looked up to grab my water glass, and that's when I caught something in the corner of my eye. You know that feeling when you sense movement but can't quite focus on it directly? It was like that. Let me pause here to explain something. I'd occasionally seen what I can only describe as human-shaped shadows around our house before. Nothing threatening, just glimpses of something person-shaped moving in my peripheral vision that would be gone when I turned to look. My mom always said it was probably just grandma's ancestors watching over us, and I'd never felt scared by them. But this was different. What I saw moving along our hallway wall wasn't human-shaped at all. It was this dark black blob, like a pool of ink floating in air. It had no distinguishable form, no head, no limbs, nothing that made it look like a person or an animal, just this amorphous pitch-black mass sliding along the wall. It was about 3 feet tall and seemed to ripple as it moved, like it was made of liquid shadow. I froze completely, my pencil suspended above my notebook. The thing moved so slowly, deliberately, like it knew exactly where it was going, and where it was going was straight toward my bedroom, where Liam was napping. I couldn't move. I couldn't call out. It was like my voice was stuck in my throat. I watched as this black blob slid into my bedroom doorway and disappeared inside. The whole thing probably lasted less than 15 seconds, but it felt like time had stretched out forever. Then I heard it. Liam started screaming. Not his normal cranky wake-up cry, but this terrified, high-pitched wail I'd never heard him make before. That broke my paralysis. I jumped up so fast my chair clattered to the floor behind me. I ran toward my bedroom, calling Liam's name. Before I even reached the hallway, I saw him. He was half crawling, half running out of my bedroom, his little face red and wet with tears, tripping over his own feet in his desperation to get away. "Mama! Mama!" he kept screaming, looking over his shoulder back toward my room like something was chasing him. I scooped him up and he clung to me with this desperate strength I didn't know his tiny body possessed. His whole body was trembling violently and he was gasping between screams like he couldn't catch his breath. His diaper was soaked through and he'd thrown up a little on his pajama shirt. My mom came running in from the garden, her hands still covered in dirt. Grandma had turned off the TV and was standing in the living room doorway looking confused and concerned. Mom took Liam from me, trying to calm him down, asking me what happened. I was so focused on Liam that I didn't even think to look back at my bedroom to see if the shadow was still there. All I could do was tell my mom that Liam had woken up screaming and I'd run to get him. I couldn't bring myself to mention the shadow thing. It sounded too crazy, and honestly, I was starting to wonder if I'd imagined it. But Liam's reaction was real. He wouldn't stop crying for almost an hour. Mom checked him over for insect bites, fever, anything that might explain his distress, but found nothing. Eventually, he exhausted himself and fell back asleep in her arms. But even then, his body would occasionally jerk and he'd whimper in his sleep. That night, when Mom tried to put Liam back in his crib for bedtime, he completely lost it again. He screamed and clung to her pointing at the doorway and repeating, "No, no, no." We ended up putting his portable crib in my parents' room that night, thinking maybe he just didn't want to be alone. But it wasn't just that night. From that day forward, Liam couldn't sleep alone anymore. This kid who used to nap through vacuum cleaning and family gatherings suddenly couldn't bear to be in a room by himself. He'd wake up multiple times a night, crying and inconsolable. Sometimes he would stare at empty corners of rooms and start crying, pointing at nothing we could see. It went on for months. Mom and Dad were exhausted from the constant night wakings. They took him to his pediatrician, who suggested it might be night terrors, which are apparently common in toddlers. But I knew better. I'd seen that thing go into my room before he started screaming. After a few weeks, I finally told my mom about the shadow I'd seen. She didn't dismiss me outright, which I appreciated, but I could tell she thought it was just my imagination or a trick of the light. Dad was more practical, checking the house for drafts or loose wires that might have created strange shadows. Grandma was the only one who seemed to take it seriously. She burned these special incense sticks around the house and muttered prayers in Mandarin that I couldn't understand. Liam gradually improved as the months went by. By the time he was 3, he could sleep in his own room again, though he insisted on keeping a nightlight on at all times. Now that he's 9, he's mostly outgrown his fear, though he still occasionally has nightmares that make him seek out Mom and Dad in the middle of the night. I'm in college now, but whenever I visit my parents' house, I think about that shadow. I've never seen that black blob again, though occasionally I still catch glimpses of those more human-shaped shadows in my peripheral vision. Those never bothered me before or since. What makes this incident so disturbing to me is how different that shadow was from anything else I've ever seen. The human-shaped shadows were just that, human-shaped. They moved like people, had a definite form. But this thing was completely amorphous, like a piece of pure darkness had somehow detached itself and gained the ability to move with purpose. And then there's Liam's reaction. He was too young to fake that level of terror. Something genuinely frightened him that day, something that affected him for years afterward. Even now, when we're alone together sometimes, I want to ask him if he remembers what happened, what he saw, but I never do. Part of me is afraid he'll remember, and part of me is afraid he won't, and I'll be left carrying this memory alone. I've researched shadow people and similar phenomena online, but nothing quite matches what I saw. Most shadow people accounts describe humanoid figures, not formless blobs of darkness. I've wondered if it was some kind of spirit or entity, or even just a strange natural phenomenon I don't understand. What bothers me most is that I don't know what its intentions were. Was it curious about Liam? Was it trying to harm him? Or was its presence near him just a coincidence? I hate not knowing. I hate that something entered our home, terrified my baby brother, and I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't protect him. I couldn't even explain to my parents what had really happened. Sometimes I wonder if I should have followed it into the room instead of freezing up. Maybe I would have seen what it did to Liam, why it scared him so badly, but honestly, I'm also relieved I didn't. The memory of that formless darkness sliding along our hallway wall still gives me chills. I haven't seen the black blob since that day, but I still check the corners of rooms when I enter them, especially at my parents' house. I still find myself glancing over my shoulder when I feel something in my peripheral vision. And sometimes when I'm alone at night and the shadows seem to deepen around me, I wonder if it's still out there somewhere, sliding along someone else's wall, entering someone else's room. If anyone has experienced something similar or has any insight into what this thing might have been, please let me know. After 8 years, I still think about it more often than I'd like to admit. Some mysteries you just can't let go of, you know. Story 20. I've always been a skeptic, never believed in ghosts, demons, or anything supernatural. Sure, I'd watch horror movies and laugh at the cheap jump scares. But what happened in my apartment 3 months ago changed everything. I still don't know what to make of it, and I'm not sure I ever will. It was a Friday night, nothing special. After a brutal work week, I just wanted to veg out and do absolutely nothing. You know how it is. Pizza delivery, a few beers, and mindless TV. I had gotten into this habit of falling asleep to King of the Hill. Something about Hank Hill's voice was just comforting, I guess. My apartment is pretty basic. 1 bedroom in a suburban complex, nothing fancy. I've lived there for about 2 years now. That night I was sprawled out on my couch in the living room, lights dimmed, with just the glow of the TV illuminating the room. The episode was the one where Bobby joins that comedy class. I remember that specifically because of what happened later. Around 11 or so, I started dozing off. I was lying on my stomach, face half buried in the throw pillow, still vaguely aware of the show playing. That fuzzy state between being awake and asleep, you know? I don't remember actually falling asleep, which is important to what came next. Suddenly, I realized I couldn't move. Not like when your arm falls asleep. I mean, I was completely paralyzed. My eyes were open and I could see my living room exactly as it had been. The TV was still playing the same episode. I could hear Hank's voice perfectly clear. Even the half-empty beer on my coffee table was in the exact same spot, but I couldn't move a muscle. Not my arms, not my legs, nothing, just my eyes. At first I wasn't scared. I'd heard about sleep paralysis before, and I figured that's what was happening. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it would pass in a few seconds, but then I felt it. Pressure on my back, like someone was sitting on me. Not just sitting, but pushing me down into the couch. Hard, like they were trying to crush me. My heart started racing. I tried to yell, to scream, to make any sound at all, but nothing came out, not even a whisper, just silence. The pressure kept increasing, and I started to panic. The room began to darken around the edges of my vision, like a vignette effect in a movie, but this was real. The TV was still playing, but the sound became muffled, like it was coming from underwater. Then I felt something else, something poking at my lower back, not like a finger, more like, I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't exactly like air either. It was moving around, probing, like it was looking for something, or trying to get inside me. That's when the real terror hit. I remember thinking, this isn't just sleep paralysis. There's something here with me. In that moment, I became certain that whatever was happening wasn't just in my head. It felt too real, too physical. The poking sensation moved up my spine, toward my neck, and I could feel my skin crawl with each touch. It was cold, but not like ice cold, more like the absence of any heat at all, a void. And as it moved, I could feel this vibration. Not like a phone vibrating, but more like the air itself was shimmering around whatever was touching me. My eyes darted frantically around the room, trying to see what was happening, but I could only stare straight ahead at the TV. Bobby was telling some joke in his class, and the laugh track sounded distorted and wrong. It was like the sound was being stretched and warped, and that's when I noticed something else. The light from the TV wasn't hitting the walls right. It was being blocked by something. Something standing between the TV and the wall. I couldn't see it directly, but I could see its absence, if that makes any sense. Like a hole in the world. And it was big. The kind of big that makes your stomach drop. The pressure on my back increased even more, and I could barely breathe. Each shallow breath felt like it might be my last. The vibrating sensation intensified, and I swear I could hear something too. Not words, but a sort of humming that seemed to sync with the vibrations. Low and pulsing, just on the edge of my hearing. I've never been more terrified in my life. I was convinced I was going to die right there on my couch with some thing on top of me. I focused every ounce of willpower I had left on moving. Just one finger, one toe, anything. Nothing responded. It was like my body wasn't mine anymore. Then I remembered reading somewhere that in sleep paralysis, sometimes you can move your extremities first. So I concentrated everything on my left arm. I visualized it moving, commanded it to move, begged it to move. For what felt like hours but was probably just seconds, nothing happened. And then, finally, a twitch. The smallest movement, but it was something. I focused harder, putting every bit of mental energy into that arm. Slowly, painfully, I felt my arm start to respond. It wasn't smooth. It was jerky, like trying to move through thick mud, but it was moving. With one massive effort, I managed to twist my body and swing my arm in what I can only describe as a defensive punch. As I did, I caught a glimpse of it, the thing that had been on top of me. It's hard to describe what I saw. It wasn't fully visible, more like a distortion in the air, dark, but not solid. It shimmered and vibrated like those invisibility effects in movies. You know, in Harry Potter, when someone wears the invisibility cloak and you can kind of see the outline of where they are? It was like that, but darker, more menacing. It had a shape, vaguely humanoid, but larger, maybe 7 feet tall. No clear features, just this mass of vibrating darkness. The moment my arm moved, the thing reacted. It literally shot across the room like it had been fired from a cannon. Not walking or floating. It moved so fast it was almost a blur. Through my doorway and into the hallway outside my bedroom, gone in less than a second. And just like that, I was fully awake. The paralysis was gone. I sat bolt upright, gasping for air, sweat pouring down my face. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. Here's the part that still fucks with me. The TV was playing the exact same scene as in my dream. The exact same joke, the exact same moment. My beer was in the same spot. Everything in the room was identical to what I had seen while paralyzed. There was no transition, no disconnect between what I saw while paralyzed and what I saw when I woke up. It was a perfect continuation. I jumped up and turned on every light in the apartment, checked every room, every closet, behind every door. Nothing. Of course, nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there somehow, watching, waiting. I didn't sleep that night or the next. I ended up crashing at a friend's place for a week, making up some bullshit about water damage in my apartment. I couldn't tell him the truth. How do you explain something like that without sounding completely insane? Eventually, I had to go back. I couldn't afford to move out, and I couldn't keep imposing on my friend. The first few nights back were hell. I slept with every light on, the TV blaring, anything to keep the silence and darkness at bay. I put a chair against my bedroom door, even though I knew it wouldn't stop whatever I had seen. It's been 3 months now. I haven't experienced anything like that night again. But I'm different. I jump at shadows. I can't sleep on my stomach anymore, and sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I swear I can feel that vibration again, just at the edge of my perception, like it's still here, just out of sight. The rational part of my brain says it was just sleep paralysis. a hallucination, my mind playing tricks on me. But another part, a part I never knew existed until that night, knows better. Whatever was in my apartment that night was real. I felt it. I saw it, and sometimes I think it's still watching me. I've researched sleep paralysis extensively since then. I know about the medical explanations, the brain chemistry, all that. But none of it explains the perfect continuity between my dream and reality. None of it explains what I saw or felt. I'm writing this now because I need to tell someone, even if it's just strangers on the internet. I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. I need to know if I'm going crazy, or if there really are things in this world that we don't understand. Because if what happened to me that night was real, then we're not alone. And whatever's out there isn't friendly, it's patient, and it's watching, and I'm terrified it's going to come back. Story 21. I've never been one to believe in ghosts. Growing up in Bayouville, you hear all sorts of stories: swamp spirits, refinery hauntings, the usual small-town Louisiana folklore. But what happened in my grandparents' company apartment changed everything for me. It's been 15 years, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. This all went down back in 2008 when my dad got laid off from his construction job in New Orleans. Money was tight, so my mom and I moved in with my grandparents temporarily while Dad looked for work out of state. My grandfather had just taken over as a supervisor at the Bayouville oil refinery after the previous manager died suddenly. I remember the day we arrived. The company housing was this blocky 3-story building from the 1970s. Faded brick, narrow windows, window units humming in every apartment. Nothing special, just practical housing for refinery workers. My grandparents' unit was on the second floor, apartment 211. "Caroline, you can take the spare room," my grandmother said, helping us with our bags. "It's a bit funny-shaped, but it's private." My grandfather cleared his throat. "That's Jack Mackenzie's old room," he muttered, and something in his tone made me look up. "Who's Jack Mackenzie?" I asked. Nobody answered right away. My mom just nodded and carried her suitcase down the hallway. Later that evening, after dinner, my grandfather finally explained over coffee. Jack was the supervisor before me, worked at the refinery for almost 30 years, bit of a loner, kept to himself, never married, no kids. "What happened to him?" I asked. My grandfather shifted uncomfortably. "Heart attack, they think. Nobody saw him for almost a week, missed his shifts. Eventually, someone came to check and..." He trailed off, glancing at me. "They found him dead," my grandmother finished bluntly. "Been that way for 5 days in this heat. Awful business." That night, I couldn't sleep on the pull-out couch. My mind kept wandering to the spare room where my mom was sleeping. Jack Mackenzie's room. Around midnight, I crept to the kitchen for water and overheard my grandparents talking in low voices. "Should have told Caroline about the room before she settled in," my grandmother whispered. "And say what?" "By the way, the previous tenant built himself an illegal room and died in it. She's only here for a few weeks." I froze. Built himself a room? The next morning, while Mom was in the shower, I asked my grandfather what he meant. He sighed, put down his newspaper, and led me to a narrow door near the laundry closet. "This wasn't part of the original apartment," he explained, opening it. Jack knocked out a wall panel and expanded into the attic space. Management didn't know until they found him. The doorway led to a short, narrow hallway that turned right, opening into a bedroom, my mom's temporary room. It was oddly shaped with sloping ceilings and a small window. Despite the summer heat and the cranking air conditioner, it felt colder than the rest of the apartment. The company was going to seal it back up, but they decided it added value to the unit. He shrugged. Extra bedroom. That first day passed uneventfully. Mom unpacked, I watched TV, and we settled into the cramped apartment routine. But that night changed everything. I woke up around 3 in the morning to my mom shaking me, her face pale in the dim light from the hallway. "Scoot over," she whispered, climbing onto the pull-out couch with me. "What's wrong?" I asked, still half asleep. "Nothing, sweetie, just couldn't sleep." But her body was tense beside me and she kept staring at the hallway. The next morning I found her drinking coffee with my grandmother, looking exhausted. "Bad night?" Grandma asked. Mom hesitated. I left the door open for the bathroom, but it was closed when I woke up. I heard the doorknob jiggling. "Old building," Grandma said quickly. "Doors swing shut all the time." "Maybe," Mom said, but she didn't sound convinced. That afternoon, while Mom napped on the couch, my grandmother told me more about Jack Mackenzie. "Odd man," she said, folding laundry. "Always tinkering with things. Your grandfather said he'd find Jack in the maintenance room at the refinery at all hours, just sitting there sometimes. Started acting stranger about a year before he died, talking to himself, staying in that room for days." "The room he built?" She nodded. "Called in sick more and more. When they found him," she lowered her voice, "the smell was so bad they had to rip out the carpet. Your grandfather only got the supervisor job because nobody else wanted the apartment." That night, Mom insisted on sleeping in the room again. "Don't be silly. I'm a grown woman," she said when I suggested she take the couch. It was just old pipes or the building settling. I woke up around 2 a.m. to muffled crying. Mom was standing in the living room, hugging herself, trembling. "I had a nightmare," she whispered when she saw me. "A horrible nightmare." I made her tea, and we sat at the kitchen table with the lights on. Her hands shook as she held the mug. "I dreamed there was a man watching me from the ceiling," she said. "He was just hanging there, suspended somehow, staring down at me. His eyes were bulging, and his face was—" She shuddered. "His skin was discolored, bloated. He was wearing a flannel shirt and overalls, work boots, those Red Wing ones with the white stitching around the sole." "It was just a dream," I said, but goosebumps rose on my arms. It felt so real, Caroline. I could smell something, like meat left too long in the fridge. She slept on the couch with me for the rest of the night. The next day, my grandfather took us to the refinery for a company barbecue. Mom was quiet, distracted. While she helped set up food tables, I wandered around with some other kids, exploring the grounds. Near the administrative building, I overheard two older workers talking. "Harrison's daughter staying in Mackenzie's room?" one asked. "Yeah, poor thing. Wouldn't catch me sleeping there for all the money in Louisiana. Heard they never could get the smell out completely." "You know what Mackenzie was doing in that room all those days? Building something. Had all these papers, diagrams all over the walls. Always said the refinery was making him sick, paranoid bastard." When they noticed me, they stopped talking abruptly. That evening, I found my mom in the bathroom, scrubbing her arms raw. "I can't get rid of the smell," she said, her voice tight. "It's like it's in my clothes, my hair." But I couldn't smell anything on her. My grandfather had invited some refinery workers over for cards that night. Mom stayed in the living room with us, avoiding the bedroom entirely. I noticed her watching one older worker, Mr. Landry, who'd been at the refinery for decades. "You knew Jack Mackenzie well?" she asked him suddenly, during a pause in the game. The room got quieter. Mr. Landry laid down his cards. "Sure did. Worked alongside him for 20-some years." "What did he look like?" Mr. Landry seemed confused by the question. "Jack, average height, thin but strong. Why do you ask?" "Did he wear flannel shirts, overalls?" Mr. Landry's eyebrows shot up. "Every day of his life. Those old Dickies overalls and flannel, even in summer. Said the chemicals at the plant soaked into regular clothes." "And Red Wing boots?" Mom's voice was barely audible. "With white stitching?" The man's face drained of color. "How'd you know that? You never met Jack." Mom excused herself and went to the bathroom. I found her there 10 minutes later, sitting on the edge of the tub, staring at nothing. "I never heard anyone describe what he looked like," she whispered. "Not once." That night, none of us slept well. Around midnight, a thunderstorm rolled in and the power went out. The apartment became stifling in the July heat without air conditioning. My grandparents and I sat in the living room with battery-powered fans, but Mom was restless. "I need to get my medication from the bedroom," she said, grabbing a flashlight. "I'll come with you," I offered, but she shook her head. "Don't be silly, it's just a dark room." She disappeared down the hallway. A minute passed, then another. My grandfather was about to go check on her when we heard a scream. We rushed to the bedroom. Mom was backed against the wall, flashlight on the floor, its beam illuminating the empty room. "He's here," she whispered. "I can smell him." The odor hit me then, subtle but unmistakable, like meat gone bad, not overwhelming, just wrong enough to make my stomach turn. "There's nothing here, Caroline," my grandfather said firmly, but he was looking around nervously. "The ceiling," Mom pointed with a shaking hand. He was on the ceiling. We all looked up instinctively. The flashlight beam showed nothing but water stains on the sloped attic ceiling. My grandmother took Mom's arm. "Come on, let's go back to the living room." As they turned to leave, the bedroom door slammed shut. My grandfather yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "The old latch," he muttered. "It sticks sometimes." But I saw the panic in his eyes as he pulled harder. The door suddenly gave way, almost knocking him over, and we all stumbled out. None of us went back into that room that night. When the power returned around dawn, my mom announced we were leaving. She packed our things in 20 minutes, called my dad, and we were in a motel by noon. 2 days later, my grandfather called. He'd gone into the room to clean up and found something disturbing. A section of the wall had been pried open, revealing a space behind the drywall. Inside were stacks of papers, refinery safety reports, medical records, and Jack Mackenzie's journal. The journal entries became increasingly paranoid in the months before his death. He wrote about chemicals in the air, about feeling watched, about needing a safe room where they couldn't monitor him. The final entry simply read, "They're coming through the ceiling tonight. I can hear them breathing." My grandfather reported the findings to the company. They sealed up the room properly this time, returning the apartment to its original layout. My grandparents moved to a different unit a month later. I've researched Jack Mackenzie over the years. He had filed numerous safety complaints about chemical exposure at the refinery. An autopsy ruled his death as natural causes, heart failure, but toxicology found elevated levels of several industrial compounds in his system. Sometimes I wonder if Jack really was paranoid, or if he'd discovered something the company wanted hidden. Either way, something of him remained in that room he built. Angry, vigilant, still watching from the ceiling. My mom never speaks about those nights. She left her medication behind in that room and refused to let anyone retrieve it. When I asked her years later what she actually saw on the ceiling that night, she just shook her head and said, "Some things are better left in the dark, Caroline." I still drive through Bayouville occasionally. The refinery is still operating, and those company apartments are still standing. I always wonder who lives in Unit 211 now, and if they ever wake up feeling like someone's watching them from the ceiling, the faint smell of decay lingering no matter how much they clean. Story 22. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. I'm still not sure if writing it down will help or just make it worse, but I need to tell someone who might believe me. This happened last winter, and I still check my windows every night before bed. I live in a small house on the outskirts of San Antonio. It's a quiet neighborhood, mostly working families, retirees, that kind of thing. Nothing unusual ever happens here, at least that's what I used to think. It started with a dead cat. I found it in my backyard one morning, this poor little stray that used to hang around the neighborhood. I'd seen it a few times, even left food out occasionally. It was a scrawny gray thing with bright green eyes. The poor animal had been torn up pretty badly by my neighbor Frank's dogs. They're usually kept behind a fence, but sometimes they get out. I could tell it was them from the tracks in the mud. I couldn't just leave the cat there, so I grabbed a shovel from my shed and dug a small hole behind my garage where there's a patch of dirt between my property and the alley. Nothing fancy, just deep enough to give the poor thing some dignity. I remember it was cold that morning, my breath making little clouds as I worked. I said a quick prayer as I covered it up, feeling stupidly sad about an animal I barely knew. That same afternoon, I noticed something odd while I was taking out the trash. There was a guy on a bicycle riding slowly through the alley behind my house. Nothing too strange about that, except he kept riding back and forth, like he was looking for something. He was a skinny dude wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up. I couldn't see his face. Every time he passed by my yard, he seemed to slow down even more, almost coming to a stop near where I'd buried the cat. After the third or fourth pass, I called out, "You looking for something?" He just pedaled away without answering. I didn't think too much of it at the time, probably just some kid from the neighborhood, but something about it left me feeling uneasy. Over the next couple days, I spotted the same guy on the bicycle a few more times. Always in the alley, always seeming to linger near my yard. I started to wonder if maybe he was casing houses for a break-in or something, so I made sure to double-check my locks at night. Then came the morning that changed everything. I work at a distribution center about 20 minutes from my house, and I was on the early shift that week. I left home around 4 in the morning when it was still pitch black outside. The streets were completely empty. That kind of dead quiet that only exists in the hours before dawn. I'd made the drive so many times I could practically do it with my eyes closed. About 3 blocks from my house, I approached the 4-way stop at Elmwood and Cypress. As I slowed down, my headlights swept across something standing at the corner. It was a figure wearing what looked like a floor-length black robe or coat, the kind that goes all the way to the ground. My first thought was that it might be someone wearing one of those Halloween Grim Reaper costumes, except it was January. The figure was completely motionless, just standing there at the edge of the intersection. What really got to me was the face, or lack of one. My headlights were shining right at this thing, but where there should have been a face, there was just darkness. Not a shadow, not a hood covering features, just a complete absence. Like the light couldn't penetrate whatever was there. My stomach instantly knotted up. I'm not usually jumpy, but something about this was deeply wrong. I hit the gas harder than I meant to and blew through the stop sign. In my rearview mirror, I could see the figure hadn't moved at all. It just stood there, facing the direction my car had gone. I tried to rationalize it as I drove to work. Maybe it was just someone waiting for a ride, wearing dark clothes. Maybe the angle of my headlights created some weird shadow effect. Maybe I was still half asleep and my mind was playing tricks, but I couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness that had washed over me. Work was a blur that day. I couldn't focus on anything. I kept seeing that faceless figure in my mind. By the time my shift ended in the early afternoon, I'd mostly convinced myself I'd overreacted to something ordinary. When I got home, I pulled into my driveway and went to check my mailbox, which is near the edge of Frank's property. As I was sorting through the usual bills and junk mail, Frank came out of his garage. He's in his 60s, retired military, keeps to himself mostly. We exchange small talk occasionally, but aren't what you'd call close. "Hey, Ricardo," he called out. "Thanks for taking care of that cat the other day. Damn dogs got out again. I'm really sorry about that." I was surprised he'd noticed. "No problem," I said. Seemed like the right thing to do. Frank looked tired with dark circles under his eyes. He hesitated for a moment, then asked, "You drive by the corner of Elmwood and Cypress on your way to work, right? Early in the morning?" My blood went cold. "Yeah, why?" "Did you see anything strange there today, around 4? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Like what?" I asked, not wanting to be the first to say it. Frank lowered his voice even though no one else was around. "Like a person in a black robe or something, standing at the corner." My mouth went dry. "You saw it too?" He nodded, then glanced around nervously. "Can we talk inside? I've got beer in the fridge." I followed Frank into his house. It was tidy but sparse. Typical bachelor pad of an older guy living alone. We sat at his kitchen table and he handed me a Lone Star. His hands were trembling slightly. "I saw it this morning," he said after taking a long pull from his beer. but there's more to it than what you probably saw driving by. Frank explained that he's an early riser, usually up by 3:30 or 4. This morning, he'd gone to open his garage door to warm up his truck around 4 a.m., planning to go fishing at a spot outside town. I hit the garage door button, and as it was going up, I saw it standing on the sidewalk across the street, he said. Just like you described, all in black, down to the ground, no face I could make out. It was facing away from the houses, toward the intersection. Frank said he froze, unsure what to do. His first instinct was to go back inside, but something made him grab the axe he keeps in his garage instead. I'm not going out like some victim in a horror movie, he told me with a nervous laugh that didn't reach his eyes. The thing didn't move for maybe 5 minutes, he continued. I was just standing there holding my axe, watching it. Then it turned, not like a person turns, but all at once, like a statue being rotated. And it started walking toward me, slow, deliberate steps. Frank took another long drink. That's when the second one appeared. The second one? My voice came out as a whisper. Came from the right side of the street, identical to the first one. Same black robe down to the ground. Same absence where the face should be. It joined the first one, and then they both just started pacing. Pacing? Back and forth on the sidewalk, in perfect sync, like they were patrolling, never coming onto my property, just walking back and forth, back and forth. I stood there watching them for almost an hour, and they never stopped, never changed their pattern. Frank's voice had dropped to a whisper. The sun started coming up, and I finally went inside and locked every door and window. When I looked out again after sunrise, they were gone. We sat in silence for a minute. I could hear the clock ticking on Frank's wall and the hum of his refrigerator. What the hell were they? I finally asked. Frank shook his head. I've been asking myself that all day. But there's something else that's bothering me. The spot where they were walking. It's right where the alley connects to the street, right near where you buried that cat. A chill ran through me as I remembered the guy on the bicycle repeatedly passing by that exact spot. You think it's connected? I asked. I don't know, but I've lived here 15 years and never seen anything like this before. Then you bury a dead animal, and suddenly there's whatever these things are. We talked for another hour, trying to make sense of it. Frank mentioned he'd installed security cameras a few years back after some car break-ins in the neighborhood. He pulled up the footage from that morning on his computer, but all we could see were strange distortions where the figures should have been, like the camera couldn't properly record them. I went home eventually, feeling like I was in some kind of nightmare. That night, I barely slept. I kept getting up to check my windows and doors. The next morning, I took a different route to work, going several blocks out of my way to avoid that intersection. It's been 3 months now. I haven't seen the robed figures again, but I still avoid that intersection, especially in the early morning hours. Frank and I talk more frequently now, bonded by our shared experience. Neither of us has told anyone else. Who would believe us? Sometimes I wonder if I should dig up where I buried the cat, but I'm too afraid of what might happen if I do. What if they come back? What if they come closer next time? Last week I thought I saw the bicycle guy again, watching my house from the alley. When I went to confront him, he was gone, but there were fresh flowers placed on the spot where I buried the cat. I don't know what those things in the black robes were, or what connection they have to the dead cat or the man on the bicycle. All I know is that something impossible happened in my ordinary neighborhood, and I'm still waiting, watching, wondering if they'll return.